All right, welcome back to On Patrol episode 14. In today's episode, we're going to go over a SAGA rules review, 1500 years plus of playability. Before we get into that, as we always do on this show, we're going to talk about our alibis, caveats, and piggybacks. And for that, I'm going to kick it over to my esteemed co-host, Windhurst Productions. Take it away, Windhurst.
Thank you, Fighting Kentuckian. So we didn't really have any alibis, caveats, and piggybacks from episode 13, which we talked about miniatures and their manufacturers. Other than that one generated some good conversation, which we always really enjoy. But again, here we are towards the end of the month, recording our monthly episode. And it's been a busy one for both of us. My kids both wanted to get kind of starter armies and Octoon Panzer stuff going. I went TDY, and now I'm kind of taken over as a section lead in our flight, which means I'm a lot busier at work. I'm working on that training product. I'm getting stuff painted. I've been posting pictures of it, and I also, when I started both of those, getting back from the TDY, I started my master's. So it's the first time going back to school after 14 years. And so that's kind of kicking my butt a little bit. So I apologize if I've been slow on things I've promised I would be working on. I mean, I've got, as I know, Kentuckian always has something staring him in the face, his shame that's out in front of him. I've got my French Napoleonics that I've got to get back to work on here. And I will. But that's all I've got for alibis, caveats, piggybacks. Kentuckian, what do you got?
Yeah, I really enjoyed your Octoon Panzer stuff that you were getting in, and the boys, I know, getting them armies. I'm sure that's going to be like a really cool project to kind of see out. I think kind of what you were talking about, I wanted to highlight you again. Another thing that you've been doing, helping out and adding wargaming to like a training tool. If you follow Windhurst's page, highly recommend that you do. You're seeing, him putting together models, putting together armies, or maybe platoon-size elements to kind of see that project through. So I know I'm with the rest of the listeners, kind of, or watchers, and making sure, oh, this is really neat, every time you post an update. So keep that coming. As far as myself, yeah, finally getting the hard copy of Octoon Panzer. We got a few games of that. Still a great rule set. Really enjoying playing it. One of the big things that's kind of happened since the last episode with me was on that 30-day field problem out in the woods, and so we had a lot of time to talk to other sections. And during that, just started talking about history. And I normally keep Fighting Kentuckian as my forefront, right? I don't post like my actual name and those things. Just kind of like that's what I that's my hobby outlet, and so I can keep it separate. Not a big deal. And then that way, I still have the outlet and the creative ability and content to post on there in my gaming life. And some people who are at Division are in the Bolt Action Escalation League that we've been doing. And so they were talking to me about things, questions that were coming up. And then it got back to one of my coworkers, which then got back to my boss. And so it started inquiring as to like, okay, wargaming, what is this that you're doing? How does this work? And got back to basically the 101st Airborne unit that I'm painting. And so working with the PAO and some other people, they just really started inquiring into it. And like, oh man, this is really cool. Like you painted Winters, you painted Buck Compton, Lutz, all these like, figures that are historically based in Easy Company. And so they just started asking questions about it. And we just talked about different battles for hours. And one of the battles that came up that's not really, I think, is widely publicized as like Brecourt Manor and those things was Lieutenant Colonel Cole's charge at there north of Carentan on the Causeway in Bridge Number 4. And so lo and behold, they just asked me, they were like, hey, would you care to basically set up a sand table or diorama of what happened? And I kind of was like, I don't know. They were talking about doing interviews and those things like that, which they've done now. And I was like, I kind of just like, it's my hobby. I just like to keep it there. But if I can help out, I guess, I will. And then my boss was like, okay, you don't have a choice. So that always, helps to motivate. Voluntold somebody. So they're like, okay, well, we want to do this story and we want to do the sand table. during Week of the Eagles and at the 101st Airborne Division. And so we've got about a little bit of time. And I said, okay, that board with the sunken fields is going to take a minute. How much time do I have? And they're like, you have 2 weeks. And I even had a vacation planned with me and my wife for just a few days and the kids. And so I think everybody's followed my page. You know, I'm hitting back information before with Windhurst is giving me pointers. Tim Peasley's giving me pointers. Jamie Hensley, all these people that are terrain gurus or know what they're doing. And, you know, I had to cut corners on some of it. 2 weeks is too hard. And I had a bunch of the airborne and Fallschirmjäger already painted, a lot of the stuff already my terrain. Got some bridges even from Warlord Games last minute. You know, huge shout out to John Russell on that, and was able to kind of have the project that was displayed in the Pratt Museum there for a while. Really good reviews on it. I thought it, you know, hopefully I did it justice in the amount of time I had. I think Colonel Cole, from start to finish, I painted that miniature like the night before. So it was you know, a lot of mistakes, but I was doing the best I could. But as kind of a benefit to that project, you know, they just were like, hey, you're really passionate about this. You love this. You're very steeped in the knowledge of what happened. And we want to invite you to be one of the Normandy historians for D-Day 80. And so as of tomorrow, and then the last few weeks since then, I have been prepping con ops to brief soldiers, civilians on different points of the 101st and what they did in Normandy. And it is, I mean, talk about just a privilege and an honor. It's going to be a significant emotional event. I know for sure to be on that ground, you know, that hollowed ground, but really looking forward to that. And so hopefully we can talk about that in the next episode, but really looking forward to it. I think another one of the things that came out of it was we had talked about it on the last scouting report. There was a tournament held by James Napier and the 502nd, Fighting 502nd out of like kind of the Louisville, Northern Kentucky area at the Patton Museum. And I have been to conventions and stuff that play at museums and stuff before, but it's always an amazing experience. I really want to go to the Bovington Tank Museum, you know, when they host events in England. I think that's just is so cool. I see the Australia boys do it all the time down there at one of their tank museums or their World War II museums. And it really just, I think, heightened the whole event. I think James and them, they were a little bit rushed looking for the date. So I don't think, you know, it was as many people as we had wanted. Still double digits, good showing, a good number of people. Prize support was great. John Russell, Warlord, really helped him out. Huge shout out to Jeff W. from Michigan and up north. He came down and provided almost all the tables. I think we were a little bit in the weeds on whether I could go and support with tables because of when I was going to leave to go to France. And Jeff just knocked it out of the park. I posted about him, but that guy is tremendous. He is a juggernaut in the hobby. And I think it's something that Windhurst and I aspire to be, just somebody that's going to help you out. He drove 12 hours, you know, to come down there, bring his tables, didn't play, and just an amazing human being, doing a lot of great projects for World War II, 28 millimeter, and he games a lot of stuff. So great event overall. I ended up taking Patton, Old Blood and Guts, right? Can't take somebody else to the Patton Museum, you know, brawl tournament. And he did pretty well. You know, I don't think I didn't play the top table. I let those two duke it out. Luckily, was able to sneak in there and get second. Had really great time. Bunch of opponents, Steve, Sean, and Andrew. Great opponents. Really enjoyed that event. Those are what events are supposed to be. It wasn't, you know, bring out your filth, nastiness. It was the organizer had developed it a little bit to, you know, reward victory points for bringing tanks. Bring in medium or, you know, heavy tanks. And then that way, you know, it took away a little bit of I would say the filthiness that comes sometimes with win at all cost historical tournaments, which is a good kind of segue into what we've got today. So that's a little bit of what we've done. Apologize that I rambled, but we're going to switch into kind of what we're going to talk about today. So a little bit of the backstory for this today before we get into it is Windhurst and I have played SAGA before. I'm going to say Windhurst is the veteran of the two of us as a SAGA player, and I'm probably the maybe have survived one battle, right? Like I'm the maybe inexperienced in between regular and inexperienced. I played a lot. I got into it and started playing a decent amount of games in like 2015 to 2018, a few games in there. And, I got distracted as we do as wargamers, and I kind of went to other game systems and stuff. There was a good group in Ohio, still a pretty good drive for me, and there was a decent group in Lexington. But then again, scheduling and all those things, and then just other systems, other things kind of distracted me from Saga. But I know Windhurst has kind of been playing since V1, since it's been out. And when we get to that period, I'll let him talk a little bit more about that. But we wanted to really go back to this rule set because similar to like what we've done in Muskets and Tomahawks, it's something that we've played before. We knew that it had an update. We knew that it, is still a juggernaut in the, historical / tournament play games. And we were just like, okay, let's dive back into this. And we'd kind of gotten some interest. Some friends of ours had played it and gotten into it. And we get a lot of, advice on what we want to do on episodes from various amounts of people and sources. And so we said, okay, let's give this a try. We both have the armies to do it, which is a good plug if you want us to do a rule set review or anything else like that. And so we said, okay, let's take this away and let's dive back into Saga and let's figure out, the depths of this, and let's end up doing a review just to see our thoughts, somebody who, is kind of coming back to it. And so on this episode, you will notice, we've kept the rubric and everything kind of the same, but we look to kind of scratch the surface of the depths of what Saga can offer you and to give you hopefully a decent rules review. As always, our disclaimer is we are not geniuses. We're not on the Mensa scale or anything like that. But I think if you hear something or you see something or you think maybe we've caught something incorrect, which me and Windhurst would always bounce when we're playtesting the game, please just come online and other parts of the rubric, maybe you agree with us or you don't. Give us your thoughts. Really love the comments. Really love the interaction with you guys. And I'm looking hopefully to the veterans out there or the people that are just kind of interested in playing with it. Definitely drop us a line and let us know kind of what your thoughts are on it. So without further ado, grab your spear, your shield, your musket, and/or your belt-fed machine gun, and join us on this episode of On Patrol. Windhurst, take it away.
Thanks, Kentuckian. So, as always, we like to start these rules reviews, and as Kentuckian said, we're not really quite going the full deep dive like we've done with other rules. So we'll just call this one a review. But we always start, our first category is the presentation, because that's the first thing you see when you look at the book. Is it a book? Is it a PDF? Do they have PDFs? Do they have ebooks? We're going to talk about how's it laid out. Is it easy to read? Does it build? Things like that. So starting with that, the format it comes in. Well, it comes in a couple formats because there's a couple books you need. So there are PDFs for the erratas and the FAQs. I don't think I've been able to find a PDF for the books themselves. Have you been able to find any?
I think I've seen a few, and I came across a few, but they were very suspect sites, and so I don't know if that's that's officially legal. But there were a few sites that like offered memberships and things like that, and I was like, oh, I really like my credit card information, so I'm probably not going to subscribe to this.
Yeah,
but so, nothing official.
Yeah. So then, in format, for those who are watching on YouTube, you've got the core book, which is a softback. And then you have the Age of books, which are hardback. And I believe the Book of Battles, which unfortunately neither of us have because both of us kind of forgot that was a thing as we jumped back in. I believe it's also hardback. And then the battle boards are kind of like a hard card that are kind of slick on one side and kind of not waterproofed, protected on the other. So that's something to be careful with. But kind of going into how they're laid out, like most rule sets you see in wargaming, it's double column throughout. This one is beautiful with loads of photos. It's full color front to back, pictures throughout and diagrams. I would say, is it easy and intuitive to read? For me, it felt fairly easy and intuitive. There's a couple things I think I missed them because I played a lot of first edition and I skipped over things a little bit because I'm so used to this rule. And when I was reading back through second edition, I think my brain blocked it out and inserted first edition in a couple little areas. I had to get clarification. How did you feel about the ease or intuitive just of reading it, going through it, since you're kind of less experienced with the rule set than I was?
I would say the first thing, the laid out, I think it was laid out very well, right? You might have mentioned it, 50 pages of right basic
Yeah.
rules. And it's kind of, you can't really extrapolate the basic rules from the Armies of book or the Age of book that you've got to supplement, but both, pretty well laid out to my mind. I think there were some things, this kind of goes back and harkens to our other skirmish reviews, whether muskets and tomahawks, bolt action, chain of command, all those things. When so much stuff interplays with each other, you're always going to have some heartburn about like, okay, maybe I need like a call back to this section or something like there in the note. And then, well, what does that do? Does it make it a jumblous mess? So I think it's laid out as good as it can. Easy and intuitive to read. Really no questions kind of about that. I didn't have major things. I think there were some things as far as like the dice thing on the board and things like that we had talked about that just weren't, maybe could have been a little bit more clear and, not perfect, but still I give it top marks for most of those things that you just asked about.
So next, kind of under presentation was how did the sections build on each other. So it did have a table of contents. It goes with like where you begin, the basics, the order phase, action phase, movement, charging. Then it went into shooting and then melee. At first I was like, maybe this order seems a little weird. I understand movement first because obviously you have to move into contact. Then charging is another movement into contact. But I would have thought melee might go after charging or maybe move shooting before charging. But at the end of the day, I don't think it really mattered. It was just something I observed going through. Then resting, fatigue, terrain, special rules, saga abilities, assembling your warband, and then an example scenario. Generally, I thought this scenario, because it's such a small book, I don't think you can't really mess up the order of how they build too much. You're not going to really get lost in some of these bigger books. What did you think, Kentuckian, as far as just how it built upon itself or the progression of the sections?
Yeah, those two to me are like intertwined with easy and intuitive and sections building on each other. I think it's just hard where, you have so many things that are going to interact with each other to include the saga, activations and reactions. And so I don't know if it would have been good to maybe do a diagram, about kind of like, they had great diagrams as far as models on the table and what that looked like, but a diagram on like questions on like, here's what you need to look. They had a bunch for like combat and shooting, and even in their examples. But I think there are other things that play into that and that interact. And like you said, in 50 pages, I can't really beat them up. Maybe it's, I would have liked it maybe just a little other way, but I thought it got the ball across the goal line. I didn't see anything like that was earth shattering in the way, that it was done, or even if it was done a different way, I probably would have had just a little bit of gripe about. Right. Well, now that wasn't. I think is definitely good, definitely above average.
Yeah.
Maybe not perfect, but good.
I completely agree with.
That's your one.
That I think I might have laid it out slightly different, but not because I don't think the layout was broken in their progression. Yeah, it was just I might have done slightly different. So you mentioned diagrams and examples. So for those who can see, they had loads of these kind of diagrams, where it's like top-down table with like circles for this move and like where you move and unit cohesion, things like that. And then some like photos of tables. And they had this really nice touch that you and I come to each other when we were kind of going back. They had these two little sections throughout the book. Essentially at the end of every section, which this is brilliant, and rules writers take note of this, the what you must remember. And it's like, here's a block of really important things from this section that you absolutely, like, here's the basics you need to remember from this section. And I thought that was really clever because when you're going back to reference, like that's what I would normally go back to reference in the rules. That seemed very user friendly. And then they had kind of like into the examples category, they had the scribe will guide you. And it was like a little area. And it's, a lot of rules do like this little narrative, like such and such does this. And that was kind of how they were talking through as an example of what would happen. What did you think of those sections, Kentucky, and the what you must remember and the scribe thing?
Diagrams are great, super helpful. I thought their diagrams were definitely on point, especially when you talk about the Saga measuring sticks, and the actual application of those and what that looks like with very short, medium, and those things. And the scribe section at the end, completely agree. That thing was money. It was the bottom line. I guess not up front at the end, but it was the bottom line of like, this is the bare minimum you need to know about this section. And then it would also, if you're just getting back into the hang of Saga, you could take a brief cursory look at it and be like, oh, okay, boom, 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 boom. I remember that. And if you've read it once, it was a great kind of jog thing. And just for a few inches on the paper, that it had at the back of the section, that thing was money. I completely agree, that other rules authors and book layouts and stuff should take note of that. Those were very well written, to the point. And I'm fine with them being at the end of the section. It's not going to make any sense, right? Bottom line up front for some detailedness. But if you've read the section, you're like, I don't know if I get this, or what do I have to know about melee combat? And you have like the 3 or 4 things up there in a row. It's like, okay, got it. I remember reading that. Yep, that makes perfect sense. Move out and draw fire. So yeah, totally think those were top notch and something to be followed.
Yep. So it just kind of occurred to me that essentially those little sections are kind of what the quick reference sheet covered. Now, in my notes, I felt like that's the quick reference sheet. It's serviceable. It felt a little lacking in some details. I think it's not an ideal quick reference sheet for a brand new player. I think you're going to have to go back through the book a bit more. But once I got kind of back in the swing of the game, it was perfectly adequate to remind me of like, I might not do shooting every game or every couple of turns. So that turn I need it. Here's the basics for shooting, the basic stats. So I felt it was an adequate quick reference sheet. Did you have any unique thoughts on it?
I think it was a good quick reference sheet. There were some things that, I think maybe a front and back with like the special rules or something like the basic special rules of like the commander as somebody who's getting their Saga sea legs back underneath them. Yeah. That could have been a little bit more helpful, but still with 50 pages, like you can't, if you flip through the whole thing, it's not going to take you 5 minutes and you're just like, okay, where are leaders? Where's this? That's great. But I think there could have been some other stuff on there, maybe, like some of the basic rules or like force laydown. I don't think that was from what I remember, I have it in my note as I don't think it was down on the quick reference sheet. It told you the generating the Saga dice and those things. It has some of the equipment on there, but I think some of the basic, like, okay, the resilience rule or something on that would have been good. Some of the other leader rules would have been good on there. Maybe a little bit more. I didn't really add in-depth terrain until kind of later in my game. And I think just doing that, here's what uneven terrain does, would have been good. So maybe that gives it a front and back. But yeah, I still think it was good. And again, I kind of go back to the base rule set is not a long book. So it wasn't super costly to even go back to that section, that's normally made up of 3 to 5 pages and skim it and you've got it. Now, if you're beginning, that can be time consuming. Some of my games should have taken probably an hour and a half and they're pushing 2, but yeah, for a novice that's, getting back into it, I think it was adequate.
So kind of something you mentioned, I should say real quick in the beginning, caveat. So I have, and I'll talk about this a bit more in depth later, I have the 2018 second edition, and Kentucky, you have the 2022 second edition, which, according to their website, is all the FAQ errata stuff from the second edition. They just kind of cleaned it up and put all that stuff in the second. So I'm curious, Kentucky, in your layout. So on the back cover of mine is the quick reference, but across from that, moving into our next section, indexes, was the glossary of terms. Does yours have that?
Yes.
So that actually has a lot of the things you just mentioned. It's not really a traditional glossary where it's like, here, go back to this page. It's literally like definitions for all of these. So it does have, it's not super user friendly because it does have like open terrain in one area and then like alphabetical, what is solid cover in a different area. So it's alphabetical as opposed to categorical. But it does have that stuff. So I did actually reference this myself with some of the commander special abilities. But you'd have to remember what the abilities they have and then go back and look what they are.
Yeah, so. That's my key is I never went to this thing. If you look at that writing and you're showing me something that's like size 8 font in the middle of a game, I'm like, all right, I'm out. No, I might have used it on maybe if playing an opponent and you wanted to look at it, but yeah, it's great that they have it though, I will say, and it was quick. If you had the time to do it, or maybe that's how you like to reference things, it could have done really well. The only thing that I've talking about indexes, where the table of contents and the glossary that we've talked about, the only really thing that I have to add back to this section is part of these, we talked about a little bit about SAGA and the game itself, right? And so maybe this is a good, we're going to talk about it a little bit more, but you've got the rule book, and we'll get into entry costs here in a little bit, but I think this will be important for the point. You've got the rule book, and then the rule book gives you kind of a base game to play, and just as our comments about it laying out. And then you'll need the Age of book. So I think my Age of book, I don't really, all the things that you said, kind of accompany the Age of book. I'm playing the Age of Hannibal and Ancients. But as we're getting into the table of contents, indexes, and glossary, any Saga player knows the battle board is what make or breaks your army. And the battle board has the special rules that allows you to be a little bit variant. And so I thought a good thing that I had to keep going back to the Age of rule book when I was going through it is on the back of the battle board, you could have basically the army list laid out. Yeah. So you could look and see what your infantry were or what the exact thing. I don't know what the cost of printing. I don't know if that would have cost an extra $1, but in my mind, it would have well been worth it because the back of the battle board's like blank, and you could have easily put on there, this is the Roman battle board, and this would have your army and your leaders and the special abilities right there, and so you could easily have quick referenced it. Cost is cost, and every wargamer thinks here's a great idea, and then it costs $1 million to implement. Not really, but a few bucks, and we're all about what is the cheapest way do we get it. I think it would have been a good use to put the army's like basic characteristics and some of the special rules for the leaders just on the back. I think that could have been a good use of the battle board, so that way I'm not half of my table at one point, and especially I think once you learn Saga, you don't really need this anymore. But if you're definitely trying to get players in, you want to make it intuitive and easy to learn. But a side of my table, and Windhurst, you tell me how you fought, was the rule book open to a section that I could flip back and forth. The Age of book, where I had both armies like quick tab that I was fighting against, so I could kind of go back and reference, well, what are their infantry rated? What's their contingent infantry rated? And then their battle board, right, as I'm going through there. And so I'm having to weave these three things together to make sure. And I think you're getting the battle board with the Age of book. It didn't seem like a lot to me to just kind of have that printed on the back of the battle board, and then it's a quick flip. Anything that helps you make the game easier to play would have been good. Not again, at the end of the day, these books weren't super huge, but referencing 3 books, I'm going back to like my law school days and legal research. I'm like, okay, this is a little bit time consuming, but I think once you get the hang of it, again, it won't be an issue either. What are your thoughts on that, Windhurst?
At first, I thought, that's brilliant. I 100% agree, but then it just occurred to me that while that makes sense on a certain level, on the other hand, you're going to have stuff on the battle board, and you're not always able to flip it over to reference it.
Yeah.
So that being said, so I've got my. It seems most of the factions, they've got a solid page. So I guess you could photocopy it. So real quick before I talk about the faction book, the only gripe I had about the core book is they don't have rules in here for buildings. And they even say in here you need the big book of battles for buildings rules, essentially. And they only have one scenario, and they say, you have to use or rules are written, you're supposed to use the scenarios for dictating how you do setup and victory conditions and everything. So they kind of tie your hand in needing to get that third book, which I felt was just a little obnoxious. But the layout, for those who can see, I've got this open to Vikings. They could fit all the information Kentuckian's talking about. In this book, it's typically all on one page. It has the unit roster with their legendary units and special characters' abilities. That would be really ideal to have easy access because, like you said, it's inconvenient to have all these books open. I didn't feel like I had to reference the core book that often once I got a couple games back under me. And I don't think there was a huge variety between my Viking units I was fielding and my Anglo-Saxons that I had to remember, okay, they can do something different that the other ones necessarily can't. Generally, the stats for Warlord, Hearthguard, and Levies were fairly consistent. I think I had one unit, like the Berserkers, were a little off for the Hearthguard. But just kind of talking about the faction books, they kind of give you a little intro to the faction, some color photos, some kind of flavor about why you might play them. And then they have a page that kind of talks about some of their abilities and how they might used, I think kind of to give you an idea how you might play them, which, is handy. And then, at the back of mine for Age of Vikings, there's like the units you can hire or extra equipment, stuff like that. I assume yours had something similar. I know yours had, the Age of Vikings has like relics and artifacts and units, but yours had something different. It wasn't like equipment they could carry, but it was tactics or something.
It had it had the ruses, which was good, to give you a different flavor of like, Carthaginians could show up on a opposing edge of the table, or here's what this army, to give you a flavor to how to play. And those, as it said, like it was mainly made for casual games, to just give you some more flavor for the period other than what the battle board does. The Age of Hannibal book also had like Epic Saga, which would basically be like 3-on-3 Saga, 8-point armies, like 24 points on a side. Looked really cool. Looked like, I definitely want to give it a try. I didn't during the play test, and just trying to get my sea legs. I wasn't able to kind of extend to that level. But yeah, it definitely had some kind of nuanced things. And especially, it was good with the Age of books just to give you the elephants and those things. Like it gave you the Sarissa, different types of equipment, and flaming pigs, right? Everybody loves flaming pigs. That they were used and how they would interact on the table, how many saga points, what were their special rules and kind of abilities. So those were really, top notch to those things to give you a little bit more of the flavor, diversity in a rule set. Just as we said at the intro, it's meant to play 1,500 years, 2,000 years. It's to be able to play that. A lot of times, you're killing each other with spears and javelins and swords, but it definitely gave it some more variety to make it feel like it was in that time period. But I think that's all I have for, the glossary and the terms. Yeah, and presentation.
All right.
Pending your thoughts, though.
Nope, I don't have anything else really on presentation that I don't think fits better in another category. So, Kentuckian, score time. What did you...
Yeah.
Not you first. I asked first.
So, I gave it an 8.5. I agree with you on the battle board. Like, you can't go and put it on the back when you have dice on it. But there were a few things in the presentation and kind of how it was laid out that I just was like, definitely a good rule set to get into. But the complexities of it, like as any veteran Saga player will know, can be daunting for somebody who's trying to learn the battle boards and stuff. and I think there could have been some just a little bit better handrails. Right, we've given some of the top games of all time, they've scored in the eights. So I thought an 8.5 was a real good score, right? Like if you're nine and everything above, you're close to perfect and that stuff above a nine. And so I thought it was definitely as good as it could be for the 50 pages and able to what it was trying to get after. And so a couple of minute things I would have changed, but I'll stick by an 8.5, which I think is above average score.
Yep. So mine was fairly close. I gave it a 9. I think the only things I dinged it for is that they don't have a PDF, which I know is something we're always advocating. I understand the reluctance of companies wanting to do PDFs because it's hard to control how many copies are out there. But as two individuals who spend a lot of time traveling and not always take our books with us, a PDF fits on a phone. And then I think I didn't really have any issues so much with the overall presentation layout in general, just the fact that it's broken up into essentially 4 items, which I'll talk in the next section a little bit more. I think kind of is a ding on presentation when you could have combined some things like putting the building rules in the core book, or like I don't have access doing Dark Ages to the epic scale version because that's in a whole nother faction book that if I really wanted to have those rules myself, I'd have to get that faction book. So, just I understand as the game evolves and they add it, the presentation's going to change a bit. But still a 9, super solid. I love it. I think they have some really novel things in there that the industry as a whole could benefit from adapting. So that's all I got on presentation. Kentuckian, you want to take us off with the next category?
Yep. So again, sticking by our rubric, the next category is what is the rule set trying to achieve? And so kind of we've distilled it down into just a few basic questions, like what is the goal of the rule set? And especially something, I know Saga when it first came out was obviously like Dark Ages, Vikings, Saxons, Normans, kind of in that realm. And very quickly it jumped to all these other periods, Crusades, medievals to some degree, and then, going back into ancients. And everybody's, a big favorite from what I've seen of online is kind of the magic as well. So it's gone into this type of game. And so when you break the game down, right, what is the goal? What is it trying to achieve? It has these basic unit elements of your leader, right, that's free, has a free Saga dice. Your Hearth Guards are your, that's the term from obviously Dark Ages and stuff, but kind of your bodyguards, your veteran kind of troops that are right by your leader. And then you have, your warriors, your levies, and your warriors can be mounted, so you'll get a lot of cavalry in there. And, you'll have some other kind of special equipment. And for something, if you look at the grand melees and things like that actually have the ability for an Age of Hannibal army to play like a Crusader army, when you have such a basic rubric and building block of the units, you allow the ability, to play through different eras, different, wars that raged almost thousands of years apart, right? But you have the ability to do that in a very nuanced and novel way. And so looking at that to try to see if it's even, I do think it's based more towards, like a tournament scene or a round robin, like our casual kind of, hey, bring your Crusaders and I'll bring my Carthaginians. You've got the flavors in the book for the more historical minded and everything, but it does hit some good tick marks in that casual historical gamer playing it and allowing you to kind of go back and forth. So I would say it errs on the side of more towards a competitive type of game. But I definitely don't think, you close the door on casual historical play, because the amount of energy and effort they put into the ruses, to the relics, like you said, in some of the Middle Ages books are awesome and definitely give you that flavor of what we've read about those periods. What do you think Windhurst is? What is the goal?
Yeah, so I also said in my notes like casual historical players. However, I don't mean casual players who just want to do pick up friendly games. A lot of the kind of games you and I play. I think the casual is on the emphasis of the casual is not the player, but on historical. I don't think the intended audience is for your die-hard historical wargamers who are going to want rules that really authentically reflect that period that they want to game. So if you were a die-hard classics or ancients and I'm a die-hard dark ages, neither of us are going to be very happy with these rules if that was like our bread and butter and all we played, because I don't think they give enough flavor to meet those individuals. But if it's like you're just getting into historicals or you just want to try a different period and you don't really know much about it or don't really care super about the details and how these forces were used, it's a great system. Like, here's a system, play any period, and I'll talk about, and kind of gatekeeping about the cost of stuff, but for relatively low model cost, grab some, if you wanted to do a, Republican Roman force, you could do it fairly cheap and give it a try. And those kind of casual players where it's like, they don't care so much about would these forces actually play, but it's like, hey, we both like historical games. I've got some Vikings. You've got some Carthaginians. You want to play a game? Here's a set of rules that lets us play together. So I think that's kind of more the casual. And I do think it lends itself extremely well for like real hardcore tournament players. Something we talked about a lot when, offline about this was the challenge if you're a tournament player of the battle boards and having to memorize the battle boards. But I know in the video game world, there's a big part of that a lot of players love. I got to know what my stuff does and what everybody else's stuff does and how I'm going to specifically counter that. And if that's the kind of tournament player, like a competitive player you are, like this game is going to scratch that itch. So I think they really went for casual historical players and like hardcore tournament players with this system.
Yeah, it's got a huge disparity. You jumped ahead of us a little bit, but all great points. I think we talked about what is the goal and who's the intended audience. I think we both kind of gnawed on that for a minute. I think, and I would agree. I think that's it. Then the last two questions, you kind of gave us a behind the curtain there on it. Does it meet the goal, and kind of what are the shortfalls of the goal? And so when me and Winhurst, we had a good conversation prior to, obviously this podcast when we were diving it around. I think one of the reasons when I first started to get into Saga, I was probably getting my fangs of being a competitive player. I don't feel myself as like a super competitive player since then, but I was playing games like Bolt Action and those things. And so if you do like a base avatar of somebody and it's like a rifleman in the game when you're playing a competitive game, you kind of what the enemy can do. And for an army, just to kind of parody this or kind of and analogize this to Bolt Action is, each army has like 2 or 3 special rules until you get into the theater selectors. And so you kind of understand where their heavy hitters are going to be. And so each, if you have the base avatar in this game, or, like your clay model is a leader, a Hearthguard, a warrior, a levy, and here's some variations. In order, the most novel thing that this rule set's done, in order to really give you a feel of that period, on their battle board, they have 10 rules. And those rules, you need Saga dice to activate them, and they give you a real good experience of like Pelum. There's some good strategy stuff in there that the Carthaginians can do, and kind of favor it towards these blank canvas, 28 millimeter models. Well, how is that really Hannibal, or how is that Scipio, or how is that Hastati, or Punic citizen spearman? What makes that a Viking? And then you're like, oh wow, this is really cool. Like I get their 10 special rules, and then you can even add some deeper ones with different leaders, right, for different factions getting different things. And you're like, this is really neat. Like this is a lot of depth to those things. And so if you're a competitive player, and you're playing like the World War II Bolt Action game, you're like, okay, I know these 2 or 3 rules that they have, and the Big Five or a few of the other armies in World War II. You're like, okay, I have to memorize, maybe 15 rules, right, 3 times 5. don't do math in public. But I have to memorize like 15 rules, and I kind of get the strengths and weaknesses of an army and a play style. In Saga, one of the things that initially was kind of it took a lot of book learning to be very good at competitive, especially when I started playing like Dark Ages with Normans and Saxons and stuff like that. And I was like, what is this type of Viking, a Joms Viking or whatever it is, versus this type of Viking, and what makes it different, and what is its pluses and minuses that the authors have kind of generated to give them that play style, but that maybe is historically minded, but also give them something that is super unique. And so in my mind, like, me and Windhurst could do easily a casual game of being like, my Carthaginians are going to fight your Crusader Templars or whatever, and probably have a decent game, right? And kind of walk our way through that. But if you were definitely trying to be, I think, one of the top competitive gamers, again, not very experienced in 40K, but from what I understand, those kind of surprise rules of like, hey, how many battle boards would you have to remember to do very well at a grand melee to get to that top table? I think it would be immense. I think the amount of knowledge that you'd have to know would have to be definitely 10 rules. And if you just said 10 armies, and I think there's like 6 or 8 in Age of Hannibal book, I think there were 6. You're already looking at 60 special rules that I'd have to kind of know without even taking into account their leaders or contingents and other things like that. That would be, at least a base of them. That's 30 or 40 rules that I'd have to have somewhat of an understanding of before I went into a tournament or event specific for Age of book. So that is scary to some degree. But I think, I think that's the goal of it, is you take this tiny tabula rasa, clean slate, and it goes through all these ages so perfectly. And so how do the authors add the nuances and stuff to it? They do it that way. It's seamless to some degree. I think it's very good. Can't say enough good things about it. But I think for the person who's like, oh, I'm going to be super competitive, like that's all I really play, like you are going to have to do a lot of book learning, a lot of reading, a lot of Sun Tzu, knowing your enemy. I think that was the term me and Windhurst were talking back. Like you are going to have to know a lot of enemy special stuff. What do you think about that, Windhurst, with the goal and the shortfalls? Any other kind of thoughts you have on that?
Yeah, just I think the gap between the casual and competitive players is pretty big. When we talked about this before and you brought up that concern, I was like, yeah, you can just walk over and look at their board and read what the stuff does. Or you could say at the beginning of the game, hey, let me see your board. Or if you're just playing a specific age and you bought the stuff, you have all the boards, you could read through them. But, I played a couple solo games, and so I was pretty familiar with both the boards I was using. And then I brought my son in, and I'm, playing with him. He can read his board, he can see what they do. But I think that's the pitfall, is not knowing the opponent's board, because I had dice on the board and he had dice on the board, and because he didn't know what my board does, and that was a little bit much to ask a 9-year-old to memorize his board and mine, like
quarter for your kids, right? No quarter.
I mean, like,
he came to play today.
He made a decision not to use something, and then it's like, okay, well, I'm going to use this ability, and now you have no attack dice. And he's like, what was the point then? Why should I? And I was like, okay, well, let's go back, because I understand you don't. I wanted to knock him down and then pick him back up. I was like, I'm just kidding, all right, dust you off, don't cry, Tom. I think that is a challenge. You kind of have to walk new players through if you're introducing them. Like, hey, I've got these dice, they can do this. Think about how that might work for you. Whereas if you and I were sitting down to play with each other, we might got snubbed that one round, but as long as it didn't kill us, I'm going to remember that ability. But it's
a good teacher right there. Yeah, a good lesson.
It's definitely a challenge, because I think this Dark Age has like 12 factions. I think Crusader has 12 factions. I don't know how many Age of Alexander has. Age of Hannibal, you said, had 8.
I think it's 6 to 8.
I mean, that's a lot. Like, if you're going into a grand melee that was like, hey, all factions are available, and that's why I said that scratching that itch, you've got to, if you want to be competitive, you need to know how those factions work, how to build your list against those factions, and how to maximize your battle board against them. So To me, that's kind of a shortfall just because that gap from casual player to competitive is so big. Where I'm a casual bolt action player and I've played in 2 tournaments now, and I didn't feel like way out of my depth. Like, oh man, these guys have a clear advantage because they're min maxing whatever. I just feel like that's a bit of a shortfall as far as how it achieves its goal.
Well, and I guess it can be right if you're trying to like dabble in the competitive. Maybe that's the term. I think you coined it when me and you were talking about it. You know, and I think you even said that with your initial like the disparity.
Yeah.
Like if you're going to go competitive, I think there's other competitive historical games where you can dabble and not get fleeced. I think Saga is probably not one of them. Saga is if you just try to dabble, like
you're gonna have a bad time.
Yeah.
Unless you like getting kicked in the gut
repeatedly. Yeah, true.
That's all thoughts I had. Scores?
Score. So you go first on this one.
I gave it a solid 8. I felt like, their goals, they kind of targeted to 2 different groups, and I feel like it can be utilized very easily with those groups. The only knockdowns was bridging the gap between those groups. It's a big leap, and that's the only reason I knocked it down. So I gave it a solid 8. How about you?
Yeah, no, completely agree. I think that I gave it an 8 as well, and my thought is I'm more giving it the 8. I think I'm a historical-minded wargamer. That's kind of where I really like to go right now. You're not going to find me probably picking up the Age of Magic book. There's so many great things in history that happened, and I love playing multiple periods to get a flavor, right? And I'm probably only getting the author of the rule set's flavor of what happened, but hopefully it's coming from some historical, facts and data. And I really thought it was very nuanced and did it very well with the 10 rules. Obviously, like you said, because I get 2 attack dice, what, how does that equal the historical flavor? And then you kind of read the rule and it's like, hey, you're using the pilum, you're using the gladius, like this is, that's what that infantry was known for. You are going to short stabbing, kind of sword. And, I was like, okay, this really hits a lot of the marks for me. And then hearkening back to what we were talking about and trying to achieve, you can take a rule set and play 2,000 years in this rule set. Like, that's awesome. How many rule sets do we have where it's subjugated to 5 years, right?
Yeah.
Or less than a year or something like that. And you can kind of pick your armies and go off and really learn a lot about them. So to me, I think it's a high score. And I second your thoughts on the disparity between, I think it would be hard to dabble in the tournament scene if you weren't a really well-rounded player and knew about it. From what I've seen online, my only caveat to that, from what I've seen online with Thor's Day and some other, YouTube channels, is it's not as that scene is not as competitive as you would think.
Okay.
And there's a lot of time where they just do normal events, and there's a lot of, best painted, best stuff like that, where the significance is off, the person that's going to try to run the table and memorize all those boards for, 100 boards or whatever for a $10 trophy, to be like, you are Sun Tzu and your gripping beast figures are the best. So I don't, people's mileage may vary, but really interested in other thoughts from the community on this one as well. So I'll kick it back to you with the next section.
Yep, so next one we're going to talk about gatekeeping. So we've alluded to some of the issues in the last couple sections that you might put under this category. So we're talking about like the entry threshold to the system, what prevents people. We've actually referred to this specific rule set in previous deep dives when talking about gatekeeping and some pitfalls that this rule set is vulnerable to. So specifically, let's start with like mechanics or things like that. So this uses bespoke dice, the Saga dice. There's not necessarily one for every individual faction. They kind of say, hey, these factions use this dice and these factions use this dice. But there are bespoke that go along. They also use measuring sticks that are kind of bespoke instead of measuring. Now, they do, caveat to that, the rulebook does say, hey, you can use a D6 and here's what the sides mean, or here's what the lengths of the measuring stick are if you don't have those. But then there's the battle boards, which comes with the faction books. There's the core rule book and the big book of battles. So Mechanics wise, I don't think there's a whole lot, but just those elements alone. So if you're talking, your entry level skirmish game, you want to get the saga. You want everything. You want the saga dice. You want the battle boards. You want the Age of books. You want the rule book and the big book of battles and the measuring sticks. At time of recording, that's going to cost you £86 or about $110 and that's no models, and you still need your own D6 and terrain and everything else. So to me, that's not even talking about models. That's kind of a steep threshold for a skirmish game. Kentucky, what do you think about? Do you think there's any other mechanics, or about just that stuff alone?
I know that they did. I think Studio Tomahawk has where you can print out some of the dice like in paper, and you can glue it. Or I've seen links online where you can do that. So there's ways to kind of get beyond that. I think the dice, most of the time I found them like secondhand on eBay or some, at a discount, still like $20 or $15 for a 8-pack of dice. But the book, I think the book roughly, I was finding at places for like the main rule book was pretty cheap, but then the Age of book with all of its, illustrious things and being 100 pages or whatever it is,
and all the
make
battle
sure
boards.
real quick. Yeah, and all the battle boards, that is a steep price. You are getting a lot. But I definitely think it can be. It's not as simple as just a point and click and $50. You're in the book. And like we said, we neither one of us purchased the kind of book of battles, which gives you a lot of the scenarios. And so I tried to. I'm putting myself in the shoes of the company, and I'm like, okay. If you're talking, if you buy the Gripping Beast models, right? It's not like it's model agnostic. Basically, you can use. A lot of people use different variations, manufacturers. No issue with that, And it gives you a lot of the sight on bases on what they need to be, and that was a good thing for me too. When we're talking about entry, I'll stop there to not jump ahead. But I could use stuff that was already in my readily collection, even though it wasn't based exactly adequate. It met the minimums for it. But yeah, it was a tough pill to swallow with needing to buy 4 or 5 things to get the game going. But then this is a company that we want them to stay in business. We want them to make money to some degree. We don't want to pay through the nose for it. And I'm not totally against how they went about it. I have a little bit of chafing on it, but I understand, to just throw out a book and hope to make a few bucks on it, and then allow, other manufacturers and other companies to kind of get in there. Not totally against it. I think it could have been done a little bit better. Maybe a few specific scenarios in the Age of book for maybe that period or a famous battle or famous skirmish would have been really good. Maybe swallow that a little bit easier. But yeah, I think it's not as easy as what you would have thought for 20 or 30 models. Still not devastating. Game. Yeah, still not devastating, but it's not as easy what you would have thought. So I guess
it was harder.
But
it was harder for me to swallow because I started playing first edition when it came out, and you got everything in that book. You got all the scenarios and all the rules, and you had your battle boards. And then the rules were successful, and then they came out with a couple of supplements that added a couple of factions. And so then to kind of take the core book and break it down in that way for me was like, really? Really? Did you really need to? But in hindsight, I kind of feel like because they wanted to cover the breadth of history they wanted, including the fantasy, that was the only way to do it. They kind of needed the rule book to be so generic. I do agree with you that they probably could. There's no reason in my mind that they couldn't have put a couple of period-specific scenarios in the Dark Age book, like the village raid,
a bridge, yeah,
or defending a bridge or something. That would be more characteristic of that period than maybe your ancients or even your crusade periods. So
even doing that in the base rule book, just have like 3 scenarios or something like that would have.
They have the one, but. So now something that isn't so much on the gatekeeping side as all the books, but is the cost of models. and talking about the size of manufacturer models, and are they available? Can you use bespoke models or others? I'll just kind of lump it all into one. So I've, when we were posting pictures of the games we were playing, someone said, "Hey, I'm looking at doing this, but in a different scale, multi-based on one base." You can absolutely do that. I think as long as you're playing with an equal force. I mean, heck, you could do 20s and 25s and 28s on the same game if you really wanted, as long as you meet the kind of min-max base requirements. So they're very easy in that way. You can use any historical models you want. Now, with that, Gripping Beast, who's kind of like the big company that runs a lot of the stuff for Saga, they do warbands you can buy. I know a couple other companies that do. You can just buy a warband, like 4 points. They kind of do the points. We're not going a deep dive in the rules so much, but through Gripping Beast, a 4-point starter faction runs you about £25 or $30 at the time of recording. And to me, that's an amazing entry level cost for a skirmish game. Like $30, and you've got all the models you need to straight up play the game. Now, when you combine that with, the rules and stuff, you're looking at like 140 to get in the game. But still, that's not that bad for a lot of skirmish games. I mean, bolt action potentially could be higher. I mean, heck, if you're not a historical gamer and you're coming over from something like 40K, which has skirmish games, that's like the total cost of the rule book for their skirmish game practically. So, I mean, that's still a really good price point, I think, for a skirmish game, and considering how flexible it is. What did you think about cost of models, manufacturers? You mentioned that a little bit.
I wanted to put a pin in it because I don't want to jump ahead of you, but somewhere around like $50. I think some of the basic armies, like if you went with a real army that didn't need a lot of models, you'd be somewhere around, I think, the 30 or 40, like you were saying. I think 50, give or take, a $10 bill or so is probably what I was looking on their site just then. I think that's where you're going to go. And then again, I love games that are model agnostic, right? Like that you can use different models and do those things. And the measurements, I play a lot of rank and flank ancients with Hail Caesar. And so I did 20 millimeter models. I play Clash of Spears. I play a lot of ancient games where I like to go in and out. And so, it was very good for me to see that and see that it was like, okay, you can do it on 20 millimeter bases, which, that gives you the upscale that you need to play some of the rank and flank games. So I'm a huge proponent of it. I'm a huge fan of. This is where I think the prices, start to level out. Get it that they might have a little bit for the rule books and things like that, but like you said, I mean, I think you can do some of the maybe more, infantry heavy or something like that, armies, maybe not heavy infantry, right? Not that they have a lot of infantry models, but 20 or 30 models for a 4-point warband, and you get it for, less than $50 is solid in my mind. When you see, miniatures really, miniature companies, harken back to our last episode, are really increasing the costs of metals. We know have gone through the roof, but plastics are still very much attainable and easy to get both sides. So I just concur with, I think, a lot of your thoughts, and just my check mark is love that it's model agnostic, so you can go to different manufacturers, 3D prints, or a special character that this one company makes, and still put it on that base and be able to play the game and get kind of the army you want out of it. Love that.
Yeah. And so the final little, just talking about potential, for me, definitely a big gatekeeping risk. So book supplements and new editions. So I initially had a lot of heartburn when I was evaluating for in a later section, so I'll talk more about the timeline that came out with all their stuff. I don't think they're in danger of outdated editions, or that they're updating too much as some other rules do. But I'll talk more detail about the timeline. They've done stuff in a later section. However, as far as gatekeeping is concerned, there are issues getting some of the supplements. It seems like quite a few of them are out of stock. Some of the age of periods are out of stock, which means if you can't find them and if they're not in print, that's a problem. And then whenever they do an FAQ or errata for the battle boards, I mean, if you're taking this battle board that you've got, and now they're like, hey, you need to change this Saga ability to read this way, they've tried to put it in their Reddit that you could cut it out and paste it on, but that was like one of the criticisms we talked about in the Octoon Panzer. You know, if you're giving us cards, you got to make sure that stuff is good to go, because I don't want to have to try and change that. That it decreases for me the personal value of it, that I've had to now glue the sticker over, you know, this ability because you've decided the ability doesn't work. And I realize there's only so much testing you can do before you find out it's broken. But that's a risk, and I think that is something you have to know when most likely when you buy your battle boards. If you're just getting into this, you're probably going to have to cut out some stuff and stick it to the battle boards if you want to make sure it's the most up to date. Kentuckian, do you have any thoughts on that?
I concur with the sometimes Gripping Beast didn't have, or Studio Tomahawk. It was hard to find the actual books and the supplements. I think one of the things, I still think you got Noble Knight Games, you got Brigade Game, other kind of third party or miniature manufacturer vendors that I was able to kind of pick up the book. So it's out there. I think you might have to look a little bit, but it's not like totally just on eBay like some of the other rule sets we've reviewed on kind of entry and gatekeeping. So it's available, but I think there are some let's make sure that we can get, this game out. And it's been out for a while, with the revised edition. 2022 is what I have, the one I have. And even in version 1, playing it in the early 2010s, 15, somewhere in there is when I was playing it. So, I mean, it's out. It's great. So I don't really see a huge issues with gatekeeping. But I'll kick it to you first for what you think the score is.
Yeah, so I gave it a 7. And I gave it a 7 because of that. I gave it a 7 almost entirely because of the number of books and material you'll need, that then also is going to need corrections made to it because of the Reddits. And it's if it's one book, that's one thing, but you have multiple items that all need multiple corrections, and that means if you want to get into this rule set, that's a burden on the company, the manufacturer, to make sure that they're maintaining a supply chain of all of those different elements. And I think there's just a great risk of that breaking down. So for me, it's still a good score. I don't think it's impossible, like you said. With this revised second edition rulebook came out 2 years ago in 2022. It's 2024 now at the time of recording, so that's not bad. They're clearly still supporting it. It clearly has a huge following. We'll talk about later. So I think 7 it's not a bad score. It's just the lowest so far. But what about you?
Yeah. I'm going to give it a 7.5. I think if it had I think it would have just taken one or two things to win me over to get it to an 8. I know that they're based on so many manufacturers making miniatures and everything. I know they're, obviously Studio Tomahawk, and those aren't going to hold themselves out to be, this miniature manufacturer company. And so I think that's where the profit margin is going to come. But I think it would have been an easier pill to swallow had there been maybe 3 to 5 scenarios in the main book, and then that you could play in any age of book that would give you a basic skirmish, spears and shields, swords, kind of what you would, hey, go get the caravan or go stop a bridge or something like that, would have gotten me to probably an 8. And the things that we talked about with, it's not insurmountable. I think there's just 1 or 2 little bit where you have to buy 2 to 3 books to really get everything you want out of a one age of you're playing. I think that's with a set of dice or 2. That is enough to just say, I get it, I understand it, I agree with it, to some degree. I want the company to stay around. They're one of my favorite wargaming companies, right, with muskets and tomahawks, everything they're doing, and I think they're doing it well. So I can swallow it. I just think that would have got it to an 8. Just a few scenarios in the main book. And I was lucky enough to get the 2022 revised edition. So, like you said, I might have felt differently if I had to do a lot of erratas. But those are my thoughts on it and my scores. Any other alibis on it?
No, sir. Take us on to the next one.
All right. So our 4th category is playability. And what we're going to talk about, I'm going to ask a few questions here, and me and Windhurst will kind of answer those questions and hopefully facilitate out the playability of it. How long before you have the system kind of down? And this is one thing that we've used. Is it 1 to 2 turns, or is it 1 to 2 games? And so I think, watching battle reports is one thing that I do to digest. If I'm trying to get into a rule set, highly recommend, other people do that. And I always phone a friend. And so before, I think watching one or two battle reports and then pulling the miniatures out on a table and playing a small 4-point battle, I think I had the basic mechanics and everything down in that 1 to 2 kind of turn. And I'm just kind of sticking here with basic mechanics down within that 1 to 2 turn. What do you think, Windhurst? How long before you had the system down?
Yeah, so for me, it was like I agree, 1 to 2 turns for the basic mechanics of the rules.
Yes.
Maybe a couple of games for battle boards, and then maybe a lot more than that if you want to be competitive. But yeah, I totally agree. A couple of turns to get the basic rules down, and a good point to this. We were at a local convention recently, and they had Saga without battle boards, and they basically had like a couple of little unique notes for the different troop types, but it was essentially they had the battle boards. We just didn't use them because it was both my sons with me and the guy running it, and that was still an enjoyable game. It was a period where there wasn't a whole lot of different in the factions, so it didn't really matter. But they were able to pick up those basic rules in like a turn or so, and that's including my 6-year-old. So yeah, a couple turns, I think anybody can get the basic rules down.
Well, and I think that that's a really good way. I felt like I almost did that, and it was just in a few of the entry level games I played where I didn't have a immense grasp of the battle board and like the finite abilities to use it. And especially it's hard to use in a 4-point game when you just you're costing dice to move. Maybe that's a good recommendation for somebody who's barely getting into it is play your first 2 games without the battle board. Maybe this is a thought. So that way you get mechanics of moving, shooting, and melee and stuff down, and then start to creep in with the battle boards. I didn't intend to do that. I think I did that on some level, but it allowed me to kind of get once the kind of the basic answer, and then you start adding in a little bit of more weight onto it. You're lifting weights here and getting your endurance and stuff down. I think that's when it can really. That would be a better way to kind of. It's almost daunting to be like, okay, what army am I playing? What's their battle board? And how far can my warriors move, or do they allowed to shoot? Do they have? Oh, it's a special battle board ability. So that was a little bit of a. I recommend kind of maybe you were fortunate enough that was planned or a happy accident. I think for me it was a happy accident just on the my inexperience. But I concur. What about the next question is, can you finish a game in 1 to 2 hours a day or a weekend? I think, again, the 4-point game, I think it would have been a little bit over. It could have been under an hour, somewhere around that mark. I think with me and my first learning games, I was at an hour and a half to some degree on like being very methodical and learning like, okay, here's what the movements are and taking my time and getting terrain and, making sure that I've laid it down and kind of the way the book has said, and then learning those effects. But even then, I'm talking like I wasn't too much, 30 minutes plus of what the time actually said in the book. So I think it's very doable. I think it's going to be a very quick and enjoyable game. And I think once you talk about playing against 2 veteran players, I mean, who knows? You probably get a game in 30 minutes, 40 minutes on a 4-point game. What are your thoughts on that? Can you finish a game in 1 to 2 hours a day or weekend?
Yeah, I think easily. I think even the two of us, not saying we're particularly experienced with this system, but just the level we've gotten after diving back in, could probably knock out a game in easily under an hour. And I think as you start playing, you realize that you might have an entire turn for yourself where you're only using 1 unit, because you're stacking all your abilities into that unit, and that turn's going to go over very quickly for you. And I think the one scenario in the rules said you can play to everyone's had 6 turns. If you're essentially activating a single unit for 1 round of do or die combat, and your turn's over, that game can go pretty quick. And I think you might tend to do that more as an experienced player because you know how to maximize your abilities. And even then, 4-point game with kind of newer players, it's still probably going to be under 2 hours. Even I think a 6 point game, a 6 or more point game with experienced players is still not going to take very long. So it's a fairly fast paced game once you understand what you're doing.
Yeah, and then you just build on the knowledge, like you were saying. So like I think it's going to always go faster until you're, maybe you and your opponent are both, playing that chess match. Um, the I in that hour and a half game, I think we each played like a dozen to 10 games before we did this review, and even in that hour and a half game, like the next time you're just okay, I'm that much more refined because 50 pages is the basic rule book.
Yeah.
Again, not totally accurate, right, when you put the age of book in there, but it's not 30 or 40 models and how they interact on the table is not, you're not going to write a dissertation about this. So the first few games, even if they are longer and stuff and you're learning it, like you're just getting that much better and you're getting that much more proficient in getting into the simplicity and the nuances of the battle board is where I think, the time is going to be a suck. So yeah, I totally agree with the hour for 4 point. I think the 8 point game I ended up playing like 2 8 point games, River Crossing, and wanted to get some other units and elephants in there. And I was a little bit over 2 hours, I think, but there was a lot of going back to the book for that, just to make sure that I had everything right for my own. I wanted to do this review justice. Still think, if I was a veteran Saga player, it would have been well under 2 hours, I think, with an 8 point game. But yeah, I mean, so that's like at the zenith of it. You're still, there's some games that we play, historical games that we play, that we're not leaving the table for 4 hours. So that should hopefully, 10 people to say like, hey, it's a great, easy, quick system. Going on to our next point, the long setup, tear down, putting models out. We've hinted about it before. You're playing on a little bit of an off-scale table, like a 3x4, 4x4, somewhere in that vein is kind of what you want for the smaller games, and that gives you the ability to say, 30 or 40 models, a few different terrain effects on there. I mean, I could have that table set up in probably 15, 20 minutes, get the game in and even tear it down in probably, that 15 or 20 minutes and get a really good a game out of it. So like, I think if you were on your toes, everything from showing up to the game shop or your house or whatever, well under 2 hours, hour and a half is what I see if you're just trying to play a small 4 point game. And, probably have time to get 2 or 3 in, right? When my wife jokes with me, like when I'm like, hey, I'm going to go down to the store, I'm going to play a game, probably be about 2 hours or something. She's like, okay, I'll see you this evening. And, there's a lot of truth to that, especially when you're setting up and you're playing a complex system. This is not the case for Saga. I'm a huge fan of that, which gives you more time on the X, the objective, with actually playing the game. So huge fan of that. What do you think for setup, tear down, putting models out?
Yeah, I think the biggest time sink is going to be how carefully you're going to put your models away.
Yeah, probably. I would say that's it. And then the last one is, does the result normally fit the game or desired achievement? To me, the abilities are great, and the abilities are nuanced, and you can tell the authors took some time on coming up with the battle boards. Like I had this one action for delay, or you have like this one maneuverability or student of Zampos or whatever it was on the Carthaginian battle board, and it was like, okay, you're seeing the cunning of the Carthaginians. And then the Romans, you have like these brute, the pilum, the gladius effects on there. You have the scutum to basically do a shield, that gives you a little bit of defense, and you're like, okay, that's all well and good. The only thing about it that I will say is it's the same with any skirmish game you play. I've played a bolt action league where we start with 250 points to help people paint and get mechanics down. But when you're playing at that low points or that few models, every game, I don't care what period it's set in, is going to suffer from swinginess of the dice and how well the dice kind of affect that. And that's something that I don't think it can be controlled. There were a few times where in my generous fashion, my dice betray me, like they always do. I need to throw those red ones away. And my Roman dice just rolled horrible. And so it really led to the downturn of the game and the effect of like, well, man, I'm just got my teeth kicked in, which, to some degree might be a historical result there for early Carthaginian battle against a Roman force in that period. But there were a few times where you can do things and you can help to make your force redundant, or you can have kind of compounding units affecting another unit, and you can build on that. But if you play, I really enjoyed the 8-point games the most, because I felt like it took away the swinginess of a game. So when we say like, hey, a 4-point game is a great start, I think you're going to be susceptible to small model count. You lose a melee and you don't have a lot of redundancy or other places on the board that you can affect. We all understand the dice get you, at some point in your life, right? Unless you're a little kid playing, you haven't rolled a 1 ever. But it can be very traumatic in a 4-point game. Whereas in an 8-point game, I really think, okay, like you can stack moves, you can stack those things, really got a better game, better feel, better use of the units, and was able to kind of make those effects a little bit better than, and it doesn't matter if it's Saga, bolt action, you're playing a World War II fighter game or anything else like that. When you have few models on the table, you're always going to have that feeling of swinginess to some degree on the dice. There's a 1 to 2 units versus 1 to 2 units, 3 to 5 units. It's going to be, it can feel swingy, but I just want to say, like, that's not something on Saga alone. That's any small model count game and stuff can feel like that. Really highly recommend playing at 6 and 8 points once you have a few 4-point games around, and you'll really see the zenith of the rule set. What about you?
Yeah, I completely agree that when it's the 4-point games, that it does, one bad melee and the game could be essentially over for you. I mean, you could have a total, one of your units wiped, and then you're just on the back foot. And I don't know. So the question is, do you get the desired achievement? So for me, it's a skirmish game, so it needs to feel like a medieval, dark age, ancient skirmishes. Now, when you did your battle report, you talked about it. You kind of gave yourself a narrative of, foraging parties. I know, and that's why I say, this. I feel like this rule set is targeting the casual historical players, because I know the more hardcore casual or historical players are going to be like, well, why would they have elephants at that level? You never have elephants or formations and stuff really at that level. And I don't know. The Age of Vikings, the army lists themselves don't, at least, so I did most of my games were Vikings and Saxons, and they really didn't feel that different. But historically, they also weren't really that different. The battle boards, the Saxons had a little bit of, I guess the flavors that the battle boards gave them didn't necessarily make me feel like, wow, like these are obviously Saxons and these are obviously Vikings, in the way that you end up playing those factions. So, I don't know. I guess for me, I'm just not a casual historical player. I know too much for my own good, if you will, when it comes, specifically this period. This is one of my favorite periods. So the games were fun, and I felt like for a skirmish game, they kind of met the goal, but they didn't really scratch the itch in like, oh man, I want a Dark Age skirmish, Viking raiders, and the local, forces out to block them. It just kind of felt like a generic battle. So...
Yeah. Unloading on it. No, I think you got a lot of merit to your point. There were, I didn't play. They have the Age of Alexander and those things with the phalanx, so I think that would have been a little bit of a stretch for me. But I mean, that's the one thing with the rule set. We said right here, how can you fit 2,000 years into a rule set that's 50 pages with a supplement, of 50 to 100 pages, total being 100, 150 pages, somewhere in that vein. And I think it does a good a job as any rule set in my mind can do with what the ask is by the audience, right? Yeah. The wargamer themselves. And so that's where I come out with the playability to get into the game get that 4-point skirmish in and everything else, I don't think you'll find a better rule set, that will give you a replication to some degree of that. You're going to have some, if you're a historical minded wargamer, you might have some stretch your imagination, or like me, try to go narrative with some of my scenarios and come up with a little bit of a why are we here, what's going on. It's definitely top notch, and that's why I scored it at an 8. I thought it was, to us, again, 8s and 9s are like above average scores is what we see, and I thought it was very well done. A few, the things that I really push on is it can be really swingy at the lower points, which every game can be, and then, like you said, I think, there might be a few historical leaps and bounds for you, but on playability, getting it up, set up, taking it down, and getting those basic concepts, it's definitely, above average in my mind. So that's why I left it an 8. What about you, Windhurst?
Same, 8 for pretty much the exact same reasons. As far as looking at the rule sets we've looked at so far on this podcast, you can't get much easier to play, playability wise, get into than this set. So
yeah. All right, you take it away.
All right, moving on. So now let's talk about the rules, mechanics, and nuances. Again, we're not doing a deep dive, so we're not going to go super in depth with all the rules here, and kind of break them apart.
Everybody's battle board.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're not going over everybody's battle board.
But let's start with kind of the thought of overall, were the rules simple or complex? For me, they were easy to get, but hard to get good at. And that's when you throw in the battle boards. And pretty much all the things we've talked about, in playability and everything. And it's a fairly simple set of rules on the surface, but then you add those boards in, it can get pretty complex pretty quickly. What do you think on that? Simple, complex?
Yeah, it's definitely simple. I keep harkening back. I think you coined that when we were even talking about it way before this episode is, if I'm comparing apples to apples with other historical competitive type rule sets that go back to bolt action, where a rifleman's a rifleman no matter what faction, and those 3 or 5 special rules like help give you the feel and the flavor of the army. Here, a Hearthguard is a Hearthguard, whether in Age of Hannibal or, the Crusades. And those battle boards, 10 rules, add so much depth that it has a lot of, I think, very deep, dark waters for you to totally grasp everything about those battle boards, but very easy to get into. And again, making mistakes playing games, and that's what it harkens itself to. I think getting in a lot of games, because it would be something, if we went down to a war game shop or over at the house, I mean, we could get, I want to feel like at least 6 or 7 games in a day, like if we were just like, hey, come over, play Saga, and let's get a bunch of games in. And then that would just help your ability and your knowledge and start to go into those deep, dark waters. But I definitely think simple on its base and on its head, 50 pages, you can't beat that. But it's got some major depth to it.
Yep. So building on that, is it got like pages of charts or just a couple modifiers? This one's kind of a hard one to answer because the base rules is a couple of modifiers maybe, but then the battle boards really is pages of charts because the modifiers just explode, based off of each and every, like you said, 10 abilities per chart. So in a single game of 2 people, that's 20 different modifiers potentially. In that one
without
game.
Your leader, without talking about your leader and all of his, special rules.
So it's kind of it's an odd one when you look at complexity and how it breaks down. And the same with crunchiness. Like the base rules are not crunchy. It's not hard to get your teeth into, but then you start adding battle boards, and it gets more complex. Any other thoughts you want to add on, charts, modifiers, crunchiness? I know we're not getting to super detail here, so.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think it isn't at its base in order to play it, but I think that you can really, and I haven't played all the Age of books, so I feel like I'm sure there's some in there that are, have some really, really nuanced things. One of the special ones in here with the elephant, it gave it 5 or few special rules and really added to it. And so it's like everything's bolted on to this base set, and so the more you bolt on, the more special units and equipment you play with, the more complex you can get. So I think that's kind of in the player's ability to how many modifiers, how kind of pages of charts do they want to add to the game. Definitely kind of choose your own adventure. But
Yeah.
no, I think you summed it up pretty well.
So game chaining mechanics. So with this, we're referring to things like in bolt action, the dice bag, the bolt action dice, or chain of command. Like the patrol phase. What's that thing that really makes it unique? And I think for Saga, it's very clearly going to be the battle board with the Saga dice. And that is how they're able to cover this 2,000, 1,500 years plus of history, because they gave you this base rule and then this plethora of battle boards and faction books to kind of really get out there and get the game you want and the period you want fairly easily. Did you have anything different that you thought really was game changing? I mean,
no, the battle board and the dice are so simple but so nuanced. The depth that those authors went into that thing they're definitely groundbreaking. As far as Saga being one of, I think, a really great historical skirmish game that really just set the world on fire with the wargamers that look to do that. And not enough can be said about how that mechanic is so simple, but equates to every age of book so well with the different drafting of the battle boards and special abilities. So top marks for me on that. I really enjoyed that and how they did it.
Yep. So the next we're talking about, do any of the rules break down or don't make sense? I didn't feel there was anything in there that didn't make sense to me. Like, I don't know why this works that way. But as far as breakdowns, from my opinion, is this was a problem in first edition as well, and I don't see a good workaround. Was the number of times you'll have units sit there and do nothing for a majority of the game because they're just kind of out of position and you don't have the Saga dice to spare to move them. Now, I think one thing I messed this up in a couple of my playtests early on because I think I was remembering how it was done in first edition, so I think they changed it. So someone in the comments correct me if I'm incorrect. I actually had to reach out to the community to help me get my head straight on this. But in the first edition, your Saga dice, you only ever had a limited pool that you generated. If you left them on the board, that subtracted from the ones you generated. And so I think it was more prone to happen. Whereas in second edition, you had a maximum pool, and every turn you generated up to however many your guys gave you, no more than that maximum. So you could leave some on the board and still generate your full set of dice as long as it remained above 8. And I think that actually, when I went back and I was like, okay, let me get some games and doing it that way, it was a little less likely to happen, but there were still quite often times where I had a unit that maybe moved once in the beginning and then it sat there for turn after turn after turn because I couldn't justify spinning the dice to get into the action. And to me, I mean, that can happen in rules like Hail Caesar, where you fail your command rule and they just sit there. I don't know, but usually that's a larger force, or I don't know. It just seemed to happen a lot more often here where a whole units just sat there and didn't do anything. Or another breakdown is types of units you're just never going to take. So like when I did Normans, I almost never took infantry unless they were ranged because their battle board didn't favor taking them. The battle board favored taking mounted units or ranged units. And so why am I going to take units that I can't spend abilities on? So to me, those are kind of two areas that broke down a little bit. How about you, Kentuckian?
Well, and I think on that, the authors of those battle boards are trying to kind of recreate, right, that Norman cavalry charge. That they're trying to keep. There's some things they're trying to keep at least a flavor of the historical mindfulness on, hey, this is what this army's known for. We're trying to get that. But if you wrap your head around the 30 or 40 models that you need, like there's probably going to be some foot knights and stuff. I can kind of see that. I think that's good. I think it gets away from them. The Norman cavalry charges are what they're known for, so that makes sense to me. The one thing that the unit's not activating. You really feel that at the 4-point games, I think. You really feel, do I want to activate the dice on the board? And you're talking about, 4-point, 5-point army. That's where you can really feel that. That's some of the friction that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. I understand why they're trying to make that the way it is, like, hey, you're going to have to stack up these. You've got choices. And so Windhurst is going to unload on you with both barrels of his cannon, or his shotgun. You can see that he's going to stack up those abilities. The 4-point games and stuff, it was, I won't say it was rare, but I mainly tried to just, go against good, like, ground movement against the enemy, put units in position and everything, and that helped me to some degree to kind of understand the game mechanics. And then as you get more Saga dice and more points, you start to trickle over to the battle board a lot more. And then at the 8-point games, you have the wheel bay or like the follow me rule, whatever it is, and you've got things where you can kind of like stack different, hey, this allows these 2 units or 3 units to move, so this allows me to place a Saga dice on one of the Eagle Eye to shoot better before that. And that's definitely, not to steal the thunder of where we're going to talk of next. I enjoyed that to some degree, but I think you're definitely going to suffer from not being able to utilize your army at its fullest with a smaller point army. It's going to give you the feeling of, do I try to put an ability, or do I just have these triarii in the rear the whole time because I can't move them up because I decided to, get somebody else to follow my leader. But yeah, I could see where I think that would definitely break down at the lower point games than it would at the higher point. The 8-point games always felt like I knew what I had to do, and then it allowed me the friction. I'm like, I got to disengage unit or get away if I'm down to my last 4 guys because I still want to generate that Saga dice for the next turn. But those are my thoughts. The breakdowns, and again, I think that goes back to swingy, are going to happen at the lower points. But go ahead.
Yeah, so building off that into friction, that being the friction, the battle boards, and you have to decide what it is you're going to activate. What dice do you want to spend to activation versus spending on abilities? And I think, talking back to playability, where it missed the mark for me is I couldn't justify mentally why I had units sitting there not doing anything, and it happened quite often in my 6-point games, where you might have one unit on the flank where my opponent's rushed condensed down, and so I've got to spend everything on these guys in the fight and can't get this guy around in the fight, because if I do so, I'm leaving guys vulnerable in the center. And in a game like Hail Caesar, where guys aren't activating because it's like, it makes sense, you can't get orders over there, or the orders break down in a big battle. But in a skirmish game, I kind of feel like in a real skirmish battle, they're going to act independently. And so I think that's where it kind of, broke the immersion. And so I do think that is the way they get your friction, because you have to make that decision. You have to decide how much are you going to spend on activation versus abilities. And I think you alluded to that being the battle boards being the point of friction. And I think it works as a point of friction. I think it's very unique. But I think that's where I tended to get, when that happened, that breakdown happened in games for me, is where the game felt less satisfying. Any other thoughts for that?
I used my levies. I experienced that in 1 or 2 games, but I used my levies as like, I tried to, if you looked at the pictures of my battle reports, even though it's a small, 30, 50 man army, I still had them in like the triplex axes and stuff like that. And the Carthaginians I had a little bit more cunning with the contingents kind of soaking up the wounds behind them. So there were a lot of times where I just had to have units supported. And then after they had, done their bit, as we say, I really looked to put them somewhere else and then didn't use them. And so I felt that in the latter part of the games where, hey, you've got your objective, you've kept, your enough models to generate me the Saga dice, you're camping here for the rest of the time. That allowed me to do a little bit more of that. But I do think, you're right in, it doesn't give you like, it's hard to coordinate attacks to some degree with the amount of dice and to get your abilities. And so the veterans, and when you start to dive into the rule set, when you can look at those battle board abilities to move 2 or 3 units with 1 dice, like that takes you from a good player to a great player, I think. And not all armies are created equal, and so there's sometimes you're gonna have to come up with creative solutions. Or like with me and my Romans, once the Velites had shot their javelins or had held onto their little bit of terrain, they were kind of out of the fight, in order for me to make all the moves that I wanted to do, which is it should be a little bit different for medieval and ancient combat, knowing there's some disparities there on how they're exactly fighting, right? Even though it's the same weapon system to some degree. But I enjoyed how the friction came out. I think it put a lot of the things in the table, and it's painful sometimes when your unit won't do what you want it to do. But I'm okay with saying that's the fog of war, and to some degree. But yeah, no, nothing really else to add. I think you nailed a lot of the rules, mechanics, and nuances. So what do you score it, Windhurst?
Yeah. So I gave it 7.5. Just because kind of that breakdown. I would say, despite my reservations about that, it really does force tactical decision making, which, at the end of the day is some things that we all love doing, and it's really solid mechanic for that. So 7.5 still above average, but I think also knocked down a bit just because of that. The disparity between the simple and complex, or the charts and everything, it's kind of swingy, not just in the game, but, on that spectrum. So what about you?
I gave it an 8, and I gave it really high. And my thought is that to take something so simple and make it complex when you want it to be, at higher points and things like that, where I think the battle board's going to have a lot of more interplay, is pretty above average in my mind. It is a solid way to do it. The Saga dice and the the way they do activations, it really, it's not perfect, just for the reasons that you've said in those things. But I think it's above average. It's a really awesome way. I didn't know, I plan to play Saga after this. There's a lot of people not too far a drive from me that are pretty deep into it. It doesn't. I'm more historical minded, I think, as you even said. So there's a lot of rank and flank that I want to hit. But I'm definitely drooling looking at those Victrix bags that are pretty cheap to come up with some Dark Age armies that I think would give me the goal I want to achieve in gaming in that period. And I think this would give me a good rule set, a good simple rule set where I didn't need to write a dissertation on to understand it. So I'm gonna give it an 8 for that.
Okay. We kind of segued nicely into the next one there.
Yeah, which is a happy accident, as they say. So category 6, these last ones will probably go a little bit quicker for us. Category 6 are opponents, kind of player community. So if you pick a game up, will I find a local opponent? Is the first one. I undoubtedly think you will. Saga is huge. It's been out on the market for a long time. And I think personally, I played a game here against one of my good buddies, John P, that plays a lot of war games, and he was able to pick it up in one game. And I think you can make them, even if you don't have one. It's a very, very simple rule set, and I think it definitely has a thriving community. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, 100%. I think you're easily going to find. I think every club around here has people that play, and like you said, you can easily make them because if you've bought the faction book, you already have the battle boards for that whole era. Literally, the only other thing you need to get a new player in is get the Saga dice, maybe for every faction if that's the only age you want to play, and just be like, hey, dude, look at how few models you need. Like we said earlier, $30 to $50 to get 4 to 6 points done, and you're golden. So yeah, I think you're going to easily find people to play.
The next question: are there conventions that support the game near me? I'm pretty sure we have a Saga tournament at NashCon, just an hour down the road. There's definitely a bunch of Saga tournaments at most of the North Eastern, as well as North American conventions that I see. It's huge. It's in that Grand Melee format, so like you can bring anything you want. One of the things that's real Saga Thursday, the YouTube channel, check it out if you're even interested in Saga. Um, they talk, in some of the conventions they talk about where it's they're really, just kind of looking for 2 days of gaming or a day gaming, 3 to 5 games of Saga. And even when I was gaming in Central Kentucky, I knew the Saga scene was huge in Ohio. So I think there's definitely a lot of conventions that you can get those grand melees at. And find people that will help kind of support you and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on conventions?
Yeah, I think there's loads of tournaments around here in the UK, and it seems like every con I go to has people playing it, either just showing it off or playing like little mini tournaments. I think even Historicon back in the States, it was pretty big there as well. So it's definitely a thriving community.
Next question: are there local clubs that support the system? I think I have one about an hour away. There were when I first was getting into the rule set and talking about it, there were a bunch of people in Nashville that had said like, "Hey, come up here." I forget that guy's name now. I wrote it down, but I don't have that piece of paper. So I mean, super friendly too. And this is something that, in my experience, I can't say I've played a Saga event yet, but they seem very. Maybe they're just taking the lamb to slaughter. All you Saga players out there, but they are so from every other. Played a lot of competitive scenes with Flames for a little bit, and then Bolt Action and stuff. And it seems they're just so inviting, and like that's the purpose of their events and stuff. I'm sure you got every group has their little person who's very competitive, but yeah, it seems like there's decent amount of local clubs just in the area that I'm at, with not too far of a drive, and I know it's huge on the Eastern Coast. So I definitely think you can find one in North America. What about you?
Yeah, here in the UK, definitely. As far as outside of the US and the UK, not really sure. I feel like I've seen quite a few country specific Saga Facebook groups,
Yeah,
like
same.
in local language. So that I feel like any rule set that is going to have enough player support where they're making groups in their own language for it, you're going to find people locally to play.
Yeah. And then one of the last questions for opponents and kind of player community: do people house rule the system? If so, is it the same game with those rules? So there's a little bit of, I wouldn't say house rules. There's a lot of like historical flavor rules, like we were talking about the ruses and the relics from the different Age of books. I played with one of those just during to make sure I had the understanding to talk intelligently about this rule set. I I can't say, I'm sure different groups have other things out there with what they do with terrain, maybe. I could see that being some. I really have no knowledge of it. I think it's a pretty simple system that, is very straightforward. There's some times where you're playing Napoleonics or Civil War or some type of other system where people will house rule it to death, right? This is how we play artillery here, or this is how we play, or we mix it from another system. I haven't seen that in my cursory view of the game and the online community and those things. I'm sure it's out there to some degree, but I haven't really seen it as far as from even the online stuff. But please, community, correct me if I'm wrong. If you think there's definitely a hot button topic rule there that people house rule a lot. What are your thoughts, Windhurst, on that last one?
Yeah, again, I haven't seen any house ruling of the system. The only thing I've seen that I would kind of lump in this category is homemade factions and battle boards for them. So I know
Okay.
when first edition came out, people were doing Lord of the Rings factions or whatever the flavor of the month was. I think even somebody in Wargames Illustrated, they did a like Dark Africa, a couple of factions,
Oh, that's cool.
and from first edition, and it was just like because they thought the rules could work for it, and so that's the most I see. I'll talk a little bit later on actually in the next section a little bit about that, but yeah, that's all I ever see.
My score for this one, I'll go first because I keep hitting you up to go first. My score for the player community and everything is a 9. I think it's well above average. I think just the Charlie Clay guy down in Huntsville. I asked a bunch of rules questions too. There were a lot of other players on the community that I posted questions to. Definitely seems to be for the majority of it. And again, I haven't played a lot of Saga events or any. Um, Seems to be definitely a good group of people that I think they understand. Hey, to get people in, to ask, to very responsive, very supportive, very how can I help you? Here's an event we're going to run. Come on down to it. So I'm definitely, I think it's a top notch player community. I can't say I've ever walked in. I've walked into game stores and seen people playing Saga, and I don't think I've ever seen dice thrown or expletives hurled across the table. And I can't say that for every game system, but I can't say that I've seen that for Saga. So in my mind, just my own experiences with it, I think it's a top-notch player community. The online people, with John or Saga Thursday and those other battle reports, like those top-notch individuals. Really look forward to continuing to interact with the community as I navigate Saga. What are your thoughts?
I actually gave it a 10. I think it's maybe the first
Perfect.
10 I gave it, just because a lot of the same reasons. I see it everywhere over here. I feel like in communities back in the States that have historical wargamers, in every group of historical wargamers, you find somebody who plays Saga or has it and had maybe not played it in a while but willing to play, or someone willing to play. And then, prepping for this episode and trying to make sure I had my head around the rules right. I reached out on a couple of the Facebook groups and loads of really friendly, positive support, offering clarification back and forth. Multiple people reaching out to offer, answers to my questions. And yeah, I think, again, not having done the tournaments, but from like what you've said, your experience of talking to people who aren't in the tournament scene, it seems like the one of the gold standards for player communities in historical tabletop wargaming. There's a lot of them, and they seem super friendly and willing to bring you in. And so, yeah, I give it a 10.
Awesome.
All right, so moving on, going to talk about supports from the publisher, creator, and company, and then after this one, it's going to be third-party support. But support from the publisher, creator, and company. So do they provide updates and erratas regularly? So I'm going to break it down for you, since I've been around Saga since the beginning. It launched, I believe, in 2012. It might have been 2011, because I jumped on board right when it came out, and I'm pretty sure it was like 11 or 12, because it was right after I got to England. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I know it's you said yourself in there like early 10s. I'm pretty sure that's about when it came out. Sometime after that, they had their FAQs and erratas. Then in 2018 is when they did second edition. Then after that, erratas, FAQs, and then 2020, a revised second edition, and there is an errata FAQ for the 2022. So you're thinking that's over from, if we say 2012 to 2022, and they've got 2 editions and a revised second edition. That's not bad. That's not, in my opinion, that's not too much or too little. I've seen even Studio Tomahawk's other rules, they haven't supported, in my opinion, quite to that level. And if you also include all the faction books and stuff they've come out with. What do you think, Kentuckian, as far as the number of updates and erratas and stuff they've done?
I think it's one thing to be like stale and never give an update, and I think it's another thing to be it's a cruise ship. You don't want to change it every other day like you see other fantasy competitive games do, where it's okay, once that new age book comes out, it just totally rewrites, people's armies and what they want to do. I think it's healthy, is probably the word I'd use to describe it. I think it's definitely a healthy updates and erratas regularly. I don't nothing about it is to me like a total negative or just breaking the mold. Like it's not. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but I definitely think it's in the healthy category, and you know, hits the mark, hits above the mark.
Yep. So with that, new supplements, yeah, obviously yes, they have new supplements. They're releasing the Age of books. I said I mentioned this earlier, as far as like house ruling. So kind of one ding on them is in the 2018 rule book. They've got pictures, if you're looking at on the video, of samurai. There, that was in the core book, and there is no samurai Age of book.
Shogun.
And I haven't heard of them. Now they've got the prime opportunity now. It's a big deal. But I've seen a lot of people make their own for that because they haven't come out with that. And it seems odd to me that in the core book you have photos of a period that you don't have rules for. They don't have ancients in the core rule book, I don't believe. But yet there's loads of rules. They've got 2 faction books for the ancients. So that was just kind of an odd thing, I thought, for supplements, as well as the fact that it seems some of the supplements are harder to get than others. What's your thought on all the supplements they have?
I think it's an error kind of back to what we talked about with muskets and tomahawks and shakos and bayonets and the colonial pictures that they had in that original revised second edition. Hopefully it's an indicator of things to come, to the studio tomahawk's going to stay healthy and keep making those things. But normally like teasers are teasers for that reason. You expect the product, maybe not immediately, but sometime in the short span for the pictures, which again, we talked ad nauseum, kind of, war game companies have their own demons they've got to fight with money and the cost of everything going up. And so I know that, I'm sure that's playing some role in those things, but I think it would be, I think this is a rule set where the sky's the limit for supplements and how you wanted to do in nuance, especially when you keep the supplements into those battle boards. Like I could really see wargaming it a long time in a lot of different directions. And I know that like the Age of Magic, from my cursory view, is pretty like generic. But like you said, I wonder if they could partner with other specific, not maybe not Lord of the Rings. They have their own, yeah, they have their own game, but maybe other places to give you those feels as well. So. Look forward to how they do that. But I think it's we've indicated to Studio Tomahawk before, hey, you've shown us these pictures. Where is it? And everything is slow. It seems to be like in the wargaming era to get those things. It costs money. Get books printed, get in the market. They need the audience. They need to make sure they're going to be able to make a profit. So I'm sure that's heavily involved. But no other thoughts other than that with the new supplements.
Yep. The only thing I would say, since we've kind of mentioned it, this is our second Studio Tomahawk thing we reviewed. We have reached out in the past to kind of get an idea, and they declined to answer or didn't get the email. I don't know. But
they got the one late on Muskets and Tomahawks. It was after we had aired the show. But yeah, nothing major. Just stuff's in the works is kind of the bluff of it.
To give them the benefit of the doubt, though, they did just recently release a new game, V for Victory. I don't know if you were following. So it's their World War II skirmish rules. Not sure if it's up our alley, but in their defense, they have just released a third rules. I imagine it's a fairly small team. They've probably put a lot of their man hours into that. So hopefully, now that that's out, we'll see some love and support for these other rule sets that we all love. So I'm prepared to cut them a little slack. But the last couple of notes under this category, I feel like we've already kind of mentioned. Does it keep the game fresh? Is it change normally good? Is it too much change? I think you said it best, Kentuckian. Is it feels healthy? Now with a little bit of pause with them working on a new rule set. I think, especially with Saga, it's been a healthy amount of updates and revisions and things like that. So I don't have anything else to add under this category. Kentucky, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I score it from the publisher and creator as a 7.5. I think it's like an eight's a solid score for us, and I think there could be. I think it's healthy on a lot of those things. The only reason I knock it down at all is I think the supplements and the erratas are something that could be maybe done just a hair better. But I think even a 7.5 is a solid score for it. And the stuff that you can print off on their site is definitely good. I think it's healthy, but overall, when we were talking about the new supplements and the fresh and those things, maybe this is I'm having a little bit of scope creep with the other section on having the actual printed copy of the book in readily available places is a thing I tick off, and maybe wrongfully so I do it in this period. But that's the only reason. Like, those are a couple of things that kind of push me to put 7.5. But I definitely think it's healthy. I definitely think it's doing great. A few minor tweaks and it would be perfect in my mind for the support.
Yep. So I gave it an 8. Very similar, very close. I mean, we're only 0.5 off. I agree. I think they could do a little bit better with the erratas, especially because there's some of the stuff on there is for the battle boards, and that's a real pain to have to update or remember or change. But to their credit, they did a second edition and then a revised second edition with the intent of trying to consolidate all that errata stuff into the rule book without necessarily saying a new rule book. And so, I was using the 2018, Kentuckians using the 2022, and we kind of compared them. They're not. It's not that different. So I'm happy. I don't feel like I need to go get the 2022 if I'm prepared to use the erratas and everything. But I think it's not cheap to make rule books, and so deciding, hey, we've kind of got enough stuff out there. Let's put it all into the rule book and make it nice and clean. I think that to me showed good intent, and I think that's maybe where I get the extra 0.5. But
for sure,
yeah, 8 for me.
We're at our last few categories, and we'll speed through these. Category 8 is support from third parties, and so I'll kind of go through a lot of the questions together, and then we can go out from there. The 4 questions that kind of we have listed out: support again from third parties. Do other companies support the game? Miniatures, terrain, and tokens? And I think the undoubted answer is yes. I think that the good thing here is this answer could be skewed a little bit because you have such a wide area of to play in. The 2,000 years, 1,500 years plus is kind of what we're getting after, and that's without even talking about Magic. So I think that yes, the undoubted answer is yes. You can use any historical miniatures that you've got. The terrain, there's the sky's the limit for what does a stone wall look like in England in 800 or 1100 AD versus what does a stone wall look like in northern Italy in 216 BC. So that you probably have a lot of terrain that you can use for multiple periods throughout Saga. Woods is a woods is a woods, right? You got rivers, swamps, bridges, all of those things. I think any company out there supports it. I definitely think it's good. The thought on it is like you said, with the buildings and those things, you can find any manufacturer that will help to do it. Like Sarissa makes all that MDF terrain for throughout Dark Ages and Ancients. You've got a bunch of resin manufacturers, and then you have 3D printing that goes off the chart. So I think my answer is yes, undoubtedly, and you can get some of the even special stuff that you need. I was talking to Windhurst. I had sold my Saga, I think V1 rule set, or I either sold it or given it, I can't remember. And then I got rid of my sticks, the Saga sticks, to just make it that much easier. So I had to go to the rule book and figure out the measurements, which it easily says in there. And then you can, kind of play with a ruler or make something. And, a lot of people have that third-party stuff that more nuanced and tied to your army, whether it be sticks or any of those pieces. The one thing that I've seen, too, that's been pretty good is the, like Sabbath bases or anything else like that, where people will make the trays, basically the movement trays and stuff. So a lot of good third-party support from the top down. What are your thoughts, Windhurst?
Yeah, like you said, it could be a little skewed because it's agnostic rule set, so you can use pretty much anything. But I think the biggest evidence for the third party support is the sticks, like you mentioned, and the fact that you can find them on Etsy, customized to the faction. I think that right there, on a modern technology, showing that people are making these and customizing them for this game, really shows the level of third party support, as well as the number of manufacturers of historical models that sell kits or deals based off the number of points. So you want a 4-point Vikings, or you want 8 points Normans, or whatever. They've got those. You can just bulk buy it all together, ready to go. And I think that's pretty clear third party support that you don't see in most other rule sets. Like that specific level of, I'm going to support this individual rule set. So because of that, I gave it an 8.5.
I ended up giving it an 8, and I think the only reason I have to call out my own, objectiveness or lack thereof it is I'm just not a huge 3D printer or Etsy person, and so a lot of the times when I buy something, I'll have a friend, 3D print me something. Windhurst was kind of walking me through that you can do it for different factions. So I was kind of looking at like bigger third-party companies to say, hey, do you make the customizable sticks and those things? There's just a little bit there that doesn't get it into that 9 bracket for me. But again, I think that's just because, showing my own inability as a dinosaur to be like, I need to go get a 3D printer. I need to go get this from somewhere else. So again, solid score. I think it's super healthy, beyond healthy in my mind. So at 8.5 for Windhurst, 8 for me, both solid scores. We're down to our last two, Windhurst. I'll let you take away number 9.
Yep, so this is our strongest reason for or against. This last two is just kind of like our catch-all, if there's anything else we want to say. With this one, basically for saying it's over in a 5, we recommend the game. So for me, kind of like the final thoughts on it, lots of people are playing it, so it's well supported. Lots of people are willing to try it. It's good for a skirmish game with a quick setup and teardown that's not super into the weeds with the historical stuff. Basic rules, quick play. Hard to master those battle boards, though. Yours and your opponent's, but that's also people like, hey, what's simple but adds complexity? And this rule set definitely does that. I feel like it sort of gives the feel of the periods with the battle boards. My biggest, coming from first edition to this, my biggest against is the fact that there is so much stuff you need to get in order, if you want everything yourself, and as opposed to joining somebody else who has everything. Whereas in first edition, it was 1 book and battle boards, and now it's 4 books and battle boards. That to me is kind of a step down, but I understand why, because they expanded the range it covers. So I think the biggest 4 is simply the breadth of history it covers. If you're looking at what is a rule set I can bring into a gaming community, like, you couldn't ask for something better to appeal to the greatest number of people. So I gave it a 7.5 on strongest for and against. How about you, Kentuckian?
My strongest reasons for playing it are I think the community is unmatched. I wouldn't give it a 10, but I think it's really close. I think the community, when you're talking about social wargaming, you're doing it against another person. That's probably, in my mind, everybody that I messaged in the community or reached out to was beyond helpful. There was you can go to other wargaming groups on Facebook or social media, and you can ask a basic question, and a lot of the times you'll get back, maybe rightfully so, I don't know. I try to be a nicer person, right? But you'll get back, did you read the rules? That's on page, like, hey, why don't you open the book? And even though I had like basic questions of some veteran Saga players out there, Charlie, Clay down there in Huntsville really was like, okay, here's how you do it. I see what you're saying about there. Probably just being nice and gracious to my own incompetency and trying to understand, about the activation and reactivation of dice. And I can't say enough good things about that community as far as one of the strongest reasons to play it. I think that it does it very well over the periods and everything. I just concur with you on all those thoughts. The strongest reason against playing it is you're probably a historical wargamer because you like the period and you like the depth of it. And this harkens back to, I think, a lot of times where you have to cut the fat out of a historical war game to just that, to make it a war game. And so I think the simplicity is another strong reason to play it. But I think the simplicity is also maybe something that will cut against it for people who are really steeped in the period. I love the Punic Wars. It's one of my favorite flat out periods. The fact that the two armies kind of fight different, the leaders versus each other, the cunning, the ability that they're not, no one army, is just such a juggernaut. It's, this awesome dichotomy between levying these legions and these great generals on the other sides with mercenaries. Like it does so well, and it's hard to get that into a 50-page rule set or a 100-page supplement. I think it does as good a job as you can to ask to get it to be that playable. But I think that would be a reason that where if that's all you want to do and you want a game, it might not have everything you need in there. And so with that being said, I give it an 8. I still think it's above average, healthy score for the strongest reasons for and against kind of playing it. I just think, you can't, in my mind, as of right now, and I haven't played Grand Melees or anything else like that, but the community seems to be one of the healthiest out there in wargaming, and the simplicity allows you to get playability quick. I just caution, those who really are steeped or love those periods. The books will have things for you to add to that and to give you that flavor, the ruses, the relics, the whatever else in your Age of books. But that's something where, you might want to bolt on more stuff or house rule something, or you might, just not be your cup of tea because it doesn't hit that. What about you, Windhurst? What do you give the score for the strongest reason for and against?
Yeah, for me it was a 7.5, right? Just one right, half a point behind you.
Okay. And, so hopefully you go after that. Yeah. The last one is the it factor. And we really went back and forth on this when we first came up with that rubric, and we didn't want to weight scores. It would come up with some crazy computations if we did. But these last two categories, should be, it gives us the ability to weight what we think is just either fantastic or, craps the bed, for lack of a better term. And so we call this last one the it factor, and so what does this game have that's so nuanced or different, and does it have that it factor? Chain of command, we talk about patrolling and some of the narrative gameplay that the Two Fat Laries have done, that's their it factor. We talk about bolt action with competitive, World War II, but still having the narrative. The bolt action dice mechanic, that's an it factor. And so what does Saga have that it's its it factor? And in my mind, it is the Saga dice. I kept fighting Windhurst when we were talking initially about block of clay for an infantryman in competitive World War II, like bolt action, narrative World War II. It makes sense to me. 3 to 5 special rules, and I'm just like, why didn't they do that? The battle board seems so, it's like looking off into the ocean, to understand everybody's battle boards. It just seems so complex that you can never grasp it. And then I keep trying to talk about the amount of time that it tries to cover and all of those things. And so there'd be no other way to do it. I think Studio Tomahawk nailed it on the head with that stuff. But I think then, the sleekness of the Saga dice, of the activation, of the interactions of activations and reactions to what you're trying to do with your army is the it factor for me. And so play, as Windhurst said, play without the Saga board, and you'll get a decent game. You'll get a spear and shield skirmish game, and you'll probably feel that way at the end of it, and it'll just could be a little swingy. Who got the jump on it? But then when you look at, okay, oh my gosh, gives me a flavor of how that army fought, whether it be the Norman cavalry or the Roman pilum and gladius or the Carthaginian cunning. You'll start to see wow, okay, this is so cool. And to do something so simple with activation dice that give you the ability to move the unit or do special moves on a 6-sided dice, that's it for me. It crushes it. I'm super supportive of it. Knocks it out of the park for me. And my score for the it factor on that is a 9. It does it really well, I think, altogether. And so hard to replicate from other game systems that I don't know you'll find. And I love other ancient skirmish and medieval skirmish game systems. You know, I'm a huge fan of Clash of Spears. I'm a huge fan of some of the other ones that we've played, like even the Bela Ludi skirmish rule set. But this is super nuanced. I'm definitely a huge fan of this now too. So that's why I rate it so high. What about you, Windhurst?
Yeah, so the it factor for me is the reason I proposed we do Saga in the first place. Originally, and it's the breadth of history the rules covers for a skirmish game. Originally, my thought was, hey, we play Hail Caesar, which you've got Ancients, I've got Dark Ages, and it covers that whole range in one set of rules. But that's a big mass battle. Let's look at a skirmish game that does that and compare. Let's compare two. And I couldn't find another set out there that had at least been out for more than this year. There was one game that is going to try and do similar that launched this year, and maybe that's a topic for something else, another video. But there really isn't another contender out there for a skirmish historical game that covers 1500 to 2000 years in history and actually pulls it off. When I was asking the community, a lot of people are like, "Oh, well, try this. This set. Oh, does it have supplements for those periods that the company came out with itself?" It's like, no, but you can modify it to do that. It's like, that's not what I'm looking for. I don't know another published system that's been out on the market for a while now that is a skirmish set of historical rules that covers that much of history. And to me, that's impressive. And they didn't suck at it. Regardless of what you say, I'm not a casual historical player, so it doesn't, quite scratch the itch for me in my chosen period. But they didn't fail. They didn't just be like, oh, well, it's garbage, and they tried. They did a fairly decent job at it. And to me, that's amazing. But I only gave it an 8. I'm not going to say it's, God's gift to wargaming. It is an impressive accomplishment and a reason I think it deserves its dedicated video to talk about podcast episode. So an 8. So
yeah, no, and we've talked, like, to highlight that. Yeah, we had some 7s in here and some 8s, and everybody. I think, again, take a look back at our rubric. Like, most of the games that we have thought have been some of the greatest games, out there on the market for decades, we were like in the mid 80s scoring them. So we definitely are both fans, I think, of Saga. Studio Tomahawk didn't say that, to pay us or anything to paint. These men, yeah, hopefully. But, tying this all up together is, I think, you get from both me and Windhurst attacking it from two angles of kind of like what we see and what we were trying to get out of this. I think we're like-minded in how we play historicals, but we definitely latched onto, I think, different attributes of the game to where we thought it really had some bright spots. So that was really nuanced and I think a good way to do it and show you how, everybody can come up to the table and play it a different way and still find enjoyment out of it. Highly recommend it. I think you get the recommendation from both of us on this. I'm glad, Windhurst had been talking about Saga for a minute now. And I think the battle board atrophy in the beginning, or like it scared me. It scared me for so long. And that was one of the reasons I think I kind of off-ramped from it. But looking back on our scores, I have our exact scores. This was not planned or anything. But you notice that we gave a bunch of different scores in a bunch of different categories. We both landed on the same score for the game. And it is an 81.5, which is a solid recommendation from the two of us. I think we told you a few things, a few minor changes, and we would have had it. It would have been close to the high 80s, where we scored chain of command and bolt action and what we think are two of the, league leaders on historical wargaming, especially for World War II. 2 or 3 scenarios maybe in the beginning, or a little bit more, stuff on easy digestion of the battle board or something like that. But beggars can't be choosers. We were trying to be difficult to some degree in rating it and being honest with ourselves and what our own preferences and stuff were towards wargaming. And you heard that in our scores. I just find it comical how we landed on the same score, with one of us giving a 7 in a category and the other giving a 9, and still, we high recommendations from us. I hope you pick up the rule set. Look forward to playing more Saga in the future, and look forward to definitely licking my lips at medievals or the medieval miniatures that I have, and pulling them back out to try to go after some different age of books. But definitely pick it up from us. I'll kick it back over to you, Winhurst, for any tying it up that you need for the rule book, and then we'll head over to Kit Bag with you.
My just final thoughts on it. I bought second edition when it came out, and I didn't play it for a long time because I felt like first edition was so good. I loved it so much that it didn't need to change, and I was bitter that I felt initially that the company was just making a money grab. Now that was before they had all these other age of books out. I gave it an 81.5. Like, I hear someone who is a skeptic out of, was this going to be worth the money? And I understand the changes they made. I understand why they needed a second edition because of the scope and the vision they had for the game. And I think my score reflects that. Even being biased coming back into it, I still scored it so high. The one caveat I will say, because I don't want to have to do this next episode, and our caveats and piggybacks, is we said if you want to try it, and you want to try without the battle board just to kind of get a feel. I kind of misspoke when we talked about it at the convention. I do recommend, if you're looking at the video, the basic abilities at the top, which are simply like how you activate units using the Saga dice. You still kind of need to do that, but you don't have to worry about the rest. And I don't want to mislead our audience, like, you don't need the board at all to get that initial experience. I still recommend using those just to help you activate. But I do think that is a good way to get a feel for the basic set of the rules, and once you're comfortable with that, then I think adding in the abilities on the battle board is a nice, easy way into this excellent rule set.
I think that's a perfect point.
Yeah. So, how about I roll into Kit Bag, and then you can hit us with Scouting Report, and then we'll say our goodbyes. Yes. Kit Bag, this one's a little different. I'm not necessarily showing you something or telling you something in my Kit Bag, because what I have in my Kit Bag I'm not happy with. And it's snips. So for those who cannot see what we're holding up, we're talking about the snips you use specifically for snipping off your plastic models from the frame. Now, I'm lazy, and I use the same pair of snips for clipping my plastic models off the frame, or clipping the flashing off my metal models, or cutting down my wire spears. And the wire spears are destroying my snips, and I don't want two pairs. I don't want one just for wire spears and one for everything else. So I would love a recommendation from the community for a good pair of snips that can do it all. What is your go-to that's like, man, these are excellent, I can use them for every situation? I want that in my Kit Bag, so I'm reaching out to you all. Kentuckian, what do you think? Do you have a good one?
I have succumbed to wire spears before. I use the Army Painter plastic snips. I'm probably going to use them. Wire spears are great. They look fantastic. They do a lot of good things. I have some Foundry phalanx that I need to get painted probably in the next few months as I embark on the Pyrrhic army. But I think that one of the things that I've done is I just went to hardier spears. If you ever use Vitric models, you know that the spears are pretty flimsy. I leave those in place, and I just try to do as much as I can to glue repair. For the metals that I buy, the various companies that I buy, I kind of got so fed up with even realistic looking spears bending, getting destroyed and everything. There's a company in England called New Line Designs, and they make a lot of great ancient armies in 28 millimeter. The scale is probably very different, more alin to 25 millimeter. A lot of my Philistine and Israelites are New Line Designs, vast majority of, with the exception of some Foundry units. And their spears are very hardy. And I went to those spears just to, like, I can cut them off, I can glue them to a model, an injured model or a wounded model. And so that was kind of my workaround with not dealing with snips and all of those things. I could see myself getting back into it if we've got a good recommendation, but the only thing my snips really touch are plastic, to be honest, plastic sprues. and
How
they work good for that.
how long are those spears though? Because I feel like most of the wire spears I get are like freaking super. They're
So
phalanx length, and then if I want them for
New
regular
Line,
spears,
New Line has them. I've got a bag of them around, but most of the models that I have, you can buy them in javelin or like long spears or short spears, and they
interesting.
are hardy. And they don't look. I'll post a picture online next to a model or something when we get done with this podcast. They don't look super out of place. You can tell they're pretty big, but they don't look super out of place. And I even most of the spears that come with armies, like my Foundry Assyrians, I use the New Line spears with them just because I was like, it takes a good bit to bend them, and it's a great company. They do a lot of good models for that. They do swords and stuff, and the swords are a little bit hardier. You can't really tell if it's a gladius or not on some of them, but they're hardy enough. A lot of the models that I've bought, the wounded models with the sword sticking out, it's thick enough that I can put the glue to it, put the model, the sword to it, the spear to the model, or lay it down next to it as a casualty, and it kind of it hits it for me. And I think that was, as I thought back to this when we were looking about what would be in kit bag, I was always like, man, yeah, I just quit messing with that. And I got lucky and ordered some New Line for my Old Testament armies. And then once I saw the spear, and I'm like, man, this is a perfect spear. Do they sell it by itself? Yeah. It's pretty expensive to get it shipped to North America, so I normally wait until they do their kind of end of year Black Friday deals. And then I just order like 500 spears or something. You get a bag of like 100 for whatever it is. It's pretty expensive, but it's, in my mind, it's worth it. So I don't have to fool with some of that shenanigans.
Yeah. That's good to know
But
for anyone else out there who's had my problem. But I have hundreds of normal wire spears that need to be trimmed down. So I still want a good pair of snips. And once I've run through those, I guess I know I'm going to go get the rest of my spears from now on.
so we'll move to scouting report then. Our last section of the episode. You've been with us guys and gals for about 2 hours. So what's coming up? What's on the horizon? We're out in our LPOPs. What does it look like to the future? I just talked to you about earlier in the episode where I was going here on Normandy 80. So I will hop on a plane to France tomorrow, and I will be out for about 2 weeks. So not a lot of hobby time. Looking forward to it. I'm glad I got a bunch of Saga games in. Of the tournament, the Bolt Action tournament with the 502nd up there and James Napier. Great event, great everything else. I'm still doing the Bolt Action Escalation League. We lost some steam where our local store got damaged in a tornado earlier this year, and so we've kind of been vagabond gaming at other stores, and I'm so thankful that other stores join the league and kind of support the league. Miso's in Louisville. Murray has a store. Murray, Kentucky has a store. We've got one even in Lexington with Rusty Scabbard. So I'm really happy that we're still, somewhat, we're gaming in garages and houses for us here local in northwestern Tennessee. But really look forward to, there's a new kickoff date for the 750 points. So that's going to be awesome. We'll probably have about probably less than 2 months of the league. We're only going to 1,000 points. Still, I think we have about 30 players. So a lot of good stuff there. If you've seen my Band of Brothers, an Easy Company in the 101st, I've been painting, as well as Colonel Cole for that 502nd charge. I did the sand table. I've got about 20 or 30 of those guys left. Really was going to try to knock those out before I left for Europe. Had to get in Saga. Me and Windhurst, we'd kind of put a line in the sand, which is we do with our projects and our SMART goals. We were like, okay, so I had to withdraw from that, but I look forward to really getting after those and getting those guys finished. I'm unsure right now. I have my suitcase and most everything packed of whether I'm going to bring some of the Band of Brothers models to maybe get a picture at Brecourt Manor with Lieutenant Winters that I painted, or maybe take a little bit of dirt and sprinkle them on my model. I'm sure somebody will tip off the French authorities and I'll be arrested for taking some French ground. But no, look forward to all of those things. As far as like a long-term project goal, if I can come back, we wrap up the league within a month and a half of me being back, and then finish that airborne army. You get project fatigue. I'm really looking at all the great ancient stuff I've gotten together. I've still yet to put paint on the epic Napoleonics that Windhurst is going away at. So I have some things that I'll need palette cleansers. I bought a bunch of Sash and Saber, French and Indian War, that fort that I was going to do Fort Necessity with. So I'm going to just take a second, especially with the league and the trips and everything else, and we'll figure out, I will figure out exactly which project I want to dive into when the league wraps up. One thing, too, to maybe look on the horizon for the next On Patrol episode is there might be an avenue where I can go to England and see Wyndhurst in June, at the end of June. And so we're going to hopefully be able to, it's depending on work and a lot of other things. Hopefully that turns up so we can get another game in the land of you Limeys and all you Englanders. And I look forward to that. Hopefully, my Kentucky crassness doesn't offend anybody. But really looking forward to what this summer holds. Not only the Normandy 80 trip, which is going to be a significant emotional event. I'm so looking forward to that. But looking forward to getting back to some other projects and getting back into some hobby time where work is kicked up, getting back from that 30-day field problem and everything, and getting into the community. And hopefully when my local store opens up, we're going to do a good bolt action event, to say goodbye to version 2, where version 3 is coming out this fall. And then Gizo, the squirrel, it has to be said, with Epic Hail Caesar coming out and doing the Punic Wars, right after I finished this 28 millimeter Punic armies and all their friends and foes and everything, and I have all the miniatures purchased, that sums it up about right. But at this time, I think I'm gonna venture into it. It looks easy and quick to speed paint up, so we'll see. Maybe that'll be a new project. My Napoleonics are yelling at me in the closet as they hear me say, "Oh, another project in front of us."
They're practice. You need to practice on the Napoleonics. Epics.
Look forward to all those things. Should be a busy summer, and just again look forward to everybody's comments on Saga for us. Really look forward to hearing back from that great community. Show us how we were wrong, that you were not a great community. Just say, these idiots talking for 2 hours about nothing. Here's how you play. So look forward to interacting. I know Charlie had said something about a Saga event coming up soon. Might try to take my hand at a Saga event with be the little lamb led to slaughter. So we'll see. But that's all on the Fighting Kentuckian front, and look forward to hearing to you guys and gals on our page, as well as interact with our pages as well, and the projects that you're doing. Thanks again. Truly appreciate it. Great time. Always great time to talk about this rule set, and I'll kick it over to Wyndhurst for his final scouting report as well.
Yeah, thanks, Kentuckian. So, like Kentuckian, I've been pretty busy. I said in the beginning, my caveats, piggybacks. The big caveat is I've got a lot of time sink stuff on the plate right now that I didn't have 2 months ago. The big one is the training tool that I convinced the Air Force to let me put together. They said, yes, here's the money, and then we bought some of the stuff for it, so now my hands are tied. I've got to deliver. And I really want to do it justice and do a good job on it so that it's something that's successful. A lot of the other branches in the U.S. military and some of our allies, I know Canada and the U.K., their militaries are using tabletop wargaming to train their warfighters. And I want the Air Force up to speed on that. And I think I found a niche that it could work in. And I'm the only one trying to do this. So I really want to do a good job at it and see it come to fruition. So you're going to see a lot of stuff of that on my page. I'll be posting as I paint through everything and build it up. And then, like I said, I'm taking over. I'm for the next couple months, at least until September, I'm the top dog running the section. And if you don't remember, I'm an air traffic controller, so I'm running the control tower at our airfield. And, that can be pretty demanding sometimes. I should get some time free up later in the year when our new boss rolls in and I can kind of step back into my old position. That means I'll have more time for the hobby. And then my master's. I haven't done schooling in 14 years, but I'm getting a master's in military operations, and I think a lot of the stuff is super interesting, and it motivates me, and some of the stuff I'm learning just kind of motivates my hobby, which I love. We get motivation wherever we can. But with hobby stuff, I do want to get back to work on these French Napoleonics. I owe the community a couple of videos, painting tutorial videos. I've been holding off on those just because I'm getting a new piece of kit that I think will just up the quality of my videos a little bit more, make them a little bit nicer. And, that's all practice and experience for maybe future stuff with this podcast. And we still have the monthly episodes with this. Big picture, long time out, expect, I think in August, we did it last year, and it'll probably be August this year. We skip a month. We did it last year kind of by accident, but it's because we were so busy. We just couldn't do a month. Usually August is when, big family vacation time. And so expect that in the future. Don't be caught off guard. I'm warning you now, so I don't want to hear any griping and complaining about it. Where's August episode? Because we need that time with our families. The military doesn't give us a whole lot. And then project
Don't give us any, no.
Relatively speaking, some of us get more than others. Some of us chose the Army and have to go in the field for a couple weeks at a time. I apart from the French Napoleonics, and I'm still kind of plugging away at the World War II stuff, and I've got a couple of side little small projects when I need a palate cleanser. Like I brought out the Blood Red Skies McGalley stuff. I've got it ready to go, so when I really need something I can just sink my teeth into for a couple days that's not all this other big projects. So I've kind of pre-positioned that as something I'll work on.
He has this, for the listeners, he has this beautiful board for Saga with the Longship laid out in front of it. And when Windhurst is talking about projects, if you look in the back corner, you can see a World War II starter army. That's being two of them added to the queue. So
they're not mine.
I know
they're not mine.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Those are my sons.
Yeah.
But that'll also inevitably mean I'll probably work on some stuff so that we can have games.
It's gonna help.
Hey, I'm trying to breed the next generation here. All right, We're getting spun up. So, but yeah, we got a lot of stuff. Hopefully, Kentucky can get some great photos when he's over the detail. I'm super jealous. I think that's awesome. I'm so excited that you've been given this opportunity, to kind of go and represent and speak. And I think, we're historical wargamers, and that's what we love. And we love having the opportunities to do this stuff and be connected to the history. I think that's what really motivates us. And hopefully we'll have the opportunity, like you said, at the end of next month, to do another face-to-face. It'll be our second face-to-face episode if we get to pull it off. Maybe I'll get some video of me taking him around sightseeing and stuff to show you guys. And I'll make sure he stays in line. You guys won't have to kick him out as another Kentuckian here. I've already broken the ice. They'll accept our kind here. But that's all I've got. Good. Kentucky, if you don't have any fighting thoughts, I'll sign us off.
I look forward to all of Windhurst's projects. We did this a long time ago as like accountability, buddies in the hobby. And so we always are messaging each other, regardless of rule set with Saga. Just showed that again is where every time we call, we joke because we're like, hey, you got time for a quick call? And it's like, you better have allotted an hour,
Quick.
We try to keep it, we try to keep it quick, but it's, I've really appreciated him doing all of that and him talking about your projects and posting it. And I really appreciate all of you doing that on the On Patrol group. It's, we want it to be an accountability kind of community. So please post those things. Andreas out of North Carolina is crushing it with the armies. There's a lot of people that are doing a lot of great things that are posted on Patrol. The evil Ginger Cat, he's just crushing it all the time with stuff. So just, really look forward to everything that you guys are posting and doing. It motivates me. I'll look at, hey, how did you do that skin technique? How did you do that? Saxon Wargamer or Sasha, the guy that does all the cohorts and the Roman cohorts. Like, these people are just top notch. I love plagiarizing your techniques and your stories to my own models. So just really keep doing that. It's helping the community, and that was the whole goal of it. And so look forward to your comments and your feedback on this episode, whether it be on YouTube or the social media, and look forward to seeing what your guys' scouting report is going to look like. And please post your scouting report on the group. Let us know where you're going. And it goes back to those SMART goals that me and Windhurst originally talked about. We're the best people we give each other ribbings and stuff, right? That my Napoleonics aren't done, but we're the best people to kind of bounce back and forth. And at the end of the day, it's all friendly. If you get that one game a year, and just like Windhurst said, we're fast approaching the summer, which will lead to the fall, which will lead to our December episode and our New Year episode. And where did you come? Be thinking of that stuff now, and where are you going, and how many games you get in, how many models you get painted, what new systems, new sets, right? We had a lot of talk about Shakos and Bandits last year. So this is just a mindfulness reminder to say, you help drive us. Hopefully we're helping to drive each other and yourselves, if for anything, or at least what not to do. in gaming. And so look forward to those things right now, but I just wanted to capture it on today. And so thanks again, everybody, for listening. Look forward to all the comments. Thanks again, Windhurst, for the time. And look forward to what new armies you're going to have here shortly, or what new rule sets we're going to be embarking on. So from Fighting Kentuckian, look forward to seeing you guys and gals on the objective next time.
So with that, grab your spear and your shield, your musket or belt-fed machine gun, and join us on the next On Patrol. Dismissed.